Chapter 1039. P.S. The word count in this chapter is more than 3,900. Well, who said that a raccoon was cheating the word count? Come out. I promise I won't beat you to death. A few days later. Clang, 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 like the rising sun in the east. Every morning, on this isolated cliff near the coastline, the sound of a powerful bell rang out on time, echoing for miles, and could be heard clearly. Like a loud bugle horn, it shattered the silence, and the scene suddenly became vivid. Smoke rose from the small fishing town at the foot of the mountain, and from above, one could see the faint shadows of people moving around, gradually becoming more and more lively. Soon after, the townspeople who had eaten breakfast officially began their day of work. Black dots more or less like ants, in groups of 3 to 5, waved and greeted each other, good-natured and cheerful, and gathered at the boundless beach not far from the town, pulling nets, raising sails, untying ropes, removing sampans. In a short period of time, fishing boats of all sizes left the beach one after another, sailing into the depths of the blue sea. It was as if they were sending him off. The slightly noisy seabirds chirped cheerfully and swept across the shallow waters. They flapped their wings and spiraled upwards. In the end, they flew over the cliff and the few dilapidated buildings on the mountain. They circled above the human-shaped cross sculpture at the highest point. That's right, you guessed right. The so-called human cross statue was actually the statue of the god of light. And the few dilapidated buildings in front of him were naturally the town's church. How ironic. I, an evil heretic who had caused havoc in the northern temple twice, would one day be saved by a little nun. Haha. That's why people say that the gods have no eyes. Even the gods can take a nap, squinting at the tall statue that was a little yellow because of the constant sea breeze. Tang In shook his head and sighed, and could not help but be speechless. Then he slowly closed his eyes in the system space. Ding obtained 15,000 blood and chi points. Ding obtained 20,000 blood and chi points. Ding obtained blood and chi points. Ding obtained medal, Big Butcher. Slightly stunned, if it wasn't for the medal that suddenly appeared, Tang In was ready to block out the noisy, synthesized voice of the system. The so-called Big Butcher is the certification medal that the system gave you for killing many void-level powerhouses at once. It doesn't have much practical use, but it's significant. Knowing that Tang In would ask, the old butler, who was lying comfortably under a sun umbrella on the beach in the distance, gave him the answer first. It's quite significant. He glanced at the value of his blood chi that was continuously increasing. It was more than 500,000. Well, not bad, not bad. One step closer to the 800,000 upgrade. Tang In waved his hand and dismissed the assassin panel. He asked casually, "What's the significance? Do you still remember how many medals you have now?" Tang In was stunned and thought for a moment. 3, 4? Blasphemer, thousand executioner, trickster, and this newly acquired butcher. Wasn't that a total of 4? Accumulate more. Accumulate more. Like I said, once you collect a certain number of medals, the system will reward you. Huh. I seem to have said it before. Does it mean that once you gather 7 of them, you can summon Shenron? There was no sound. The old butler obviously did not bother to answer this silly question. Of course, Tang In did not expect the old butler to respond. He shrugged and waved his hand to bring up the map of the Brand territory. He approached it and easily found the Leno River that ran from the north to the south of the Brand. Then he chanted the words up north, down south, left west, right east. His gaze kept drifting to the right of the map, drifting. Finally, at the end, he saw a sea. He scratched his head. Damn, so far. Even the long-distance teleportation circle is not this powerful. F***CK. Tang In's current position was more than 10,000 miles away from the Leno River where they fought. Just looking at the map that had been shrunk countless times was enough to make one dizzy, not to mention the actual distance. Of course, the most troublesome thing now was not the distance, but the injuries on Tang In's body. No matter how far the distance was, as long as he could find the long-distance teleportation circle in the nearby city, everything would be easy. But the problem now was that Tang and could not even walk. How could he find the teleportation circle? The old butler was indeed an experienced butler. Once again, he saw the crux of the problem. You'd better heal your injuries first. He did not even turn his head. His tone was still calm, but anyone could hear the sarcasm in his voice. Not bad. You're becoming more and more like a top assassin. You like to find targets who seek death. It's very challenging. Of course, this was sarcasm. Tang touched his nose awkwardly. Didn't I miscalculate? Who would have thought that Wu Ding would not act according to common sense? Thinking about the horrible battle scene on the Leno River and his experience of walking on the edge of life and death before being saved by luck, Tang In could not help but feel a little scared. He sighed and said, "This is the last time. I can't play like this in the future. It's too king exciting." Is that so? Then let me give you another piece of advice. The old butler shook his head non-committally and said, "As an assassin, never say this is the last time. It's taboo. Most of the time, those who say this will almost always fail in their last mission." That makes sense. Since it made sense, there was nothing to argue about. Tang In, who did not want to continue being ridiculed, wisely left the system space immediately. Well, it's time for breakfast. Tang In, who had just returned to the real world and opened his eyes, did not have time to estimate his overall injuries before the door of the room was directly pushed open. "Arthur, it's time to eat. There's delicious fish pastries." Needless to say, the owner of the voice who sounded like she was coaxing a child was naturally his savior, who was a little talkative. "Thank you, Cindy." Turning his head to look at the beautiful little nun who kicked the door open with both hands holding a plate of food, Tang could not help but secretly praise his destiny that was harder than reinforced concrete. If he remembered correctly, he had experienced such a state of near death and fainting 4 times in total. Every time, there was someone who came to his rescue. Lena, Josiah, the siblings from the charming fox tribe, and now this little nun. Well, it was actually a young woman every time. Could this be considered luck and love? Or a love calamity? Twain, who was a little absent-minded, did not pay attention to the little nun's words. She immediately pouted and complained loudly. "I have reminded you many times, my name is C. No, it's Seeing. Don't call me by the wrong name again, or else I won't give you food." "Oh, sorry, Cindy." Seeing. It's Seeing." The little nun screamed loudly, a little frantic. "Okay, Cindy." With a bang, the door of the room was kicked open from the inside. The angry little nun turned around and wanted to leave this sad place. "You bully, I'm going to find Uncle Myson to teach you a lesson." "Haha, I'm kidding. Seeing, I'm really kidding. That. At least leave me some breakfast." Tang and always took revenge when he had a grudge, never skipping a night. Thinking back to a few days ago when he just woke up, Tang Yin was very angry because he didn't understand the little nun's bad habit of talking. Not to mention the continuous coughing and the severe pain all over his body. He fainted twice from anger. Such a tragic experience that he couldn't bear to recall. After Tang Yin found the little nun's sore spot, the name that he was dissatisfied with, how could he not tease her to get back at her? Well, the real reason was that Tang Yin, who was lying in bed and couldn't go anywhere, was bored, adhering to the great teachings of the Father, to give believers who admit their mistakes a chance to atone. After hesitating, the little nun pouted again and walked into the room with the breakfast. The little nun's heart was really good. Not to mention that she picked up the dying Tang In from the beach before. After Tang In woke up and realized that he couldn't walk, she took the initiative to pick up the spoon to feed Tang In without him asking. It could be said that she served him well. It's just that her bad habit of talking was really annoying. "I'm warning you, don't make me angry again. Otherwise, not only will I not give you food, Uncle Myson will also not treat your injuries." Humph. In short, don't provoke me, be obedient. The situation was stronger than the person. So what could Tang In say? He could only grin and pretend that he didn't hear the tone that was used to coax a child. After a few days, although Tang In didn't leave the room, he was very familiar with the current environment. It was not a trick, and there was no need for that. The little nun's mouth was almost always idle, so Tang In couldn't help but listen to it, Their current approximate location was on the easternmost coastline of the Brand territory. To be more specific, it was in a dilapidated chapel on the cliff by the sea. It was indeed dilapidated. Not only the few buildings had a long history and were in urgent need of repair. There were only two permanent residents here, the little nun and the Uncle Myson that the little nun mentioned, who was also the preaching priest here. Oh, now, there were three people, with the addition of Tang, and who was seriously injured and freeloading. In addition to the prayer meeting held once a week, believers from the fishing village at the foot of the mountain would climb up the mountain. Usually, there were only the little nun and the priest on the mountain. Perhaps it was because of the lonely and cold atmosphere that the little nun developed a habit of talking. She could talk for a long time about cats, dogs, flowers, and plants. The little nun was not from the fishing village. She was picked up by Father Myson from outside when she was young, and she was also on the beach. To understand, the taste of an old man who was alone had always been strange, even if it was a priest who often relieved the troubles of others. So he gave the little nun the name Cindy, which was more like a boy's name. Things were simple after that. As the little nun gradually grew up and became more sensible, she probably had a dark history of being maliciously mocked by children of the same age, so she naturally hated the name Cindy. So, she resolutely embarked on the road of no return by constantly changing her name. Of course, the effect was not very good. The power of habit was strong. After all, she had been called Cindy for so many years. Even if the little nun repeatedly promoted her new name, she would not get much recognition, unless she decided on a name and insisted on spreading it until she changed everyone's impression of it. However, the little nun herself obviously did not realize this point and went into a dead end. She only thought that her name was not changed well enough, so she could not get recognition from everyone. Therefore, she racked her brains and came up with a new name for herself every once in a while. The result was self-evident. The fishermen were confused by one new name after another. In the end, they simply ignored her opinion and called her Cindy. Cindy, of course. The little nun's temper was still very stubborn, so she took the blame. I'm not well educated, don't lie to me. Seeing does sound better than see, right? I also think it sounds good, but it sounds a little strange, yes, mysterious. How can it not be strange, big sister? Do you know how strange it is for a modern name to appear in this world? I'm a purebred modern person, but when I come here, I have to do as the Romans do and call myself Arthur. You still want to be mysterious. Smacking his lips, Tang, and was too tired to complain. Seeing the little nun so excited, he could not bear to discourage her, so he vaguely agreed with the food in his mouth. She decisively decided, then I'll call you Seeing. Tomorrow at the prayer meeting, I'll announce to everyone that I, Cindy, have officially changed my name to Seeing. This time, I will definitely not change it. Haha, Seeing it sounds so good. After entertaining herself for a while, the little nun, who had just successfully changed her name, once again habitually activated her chatterbox skills. She could talk about any trivial matter with relish. Arthur, do you know, on the day I saved you, it was stormy and the weather on the sea was terrible. I heard that Uncle Matt from the town didn't manage to sail the boat back. Sigh, I think Aunt Matt will cry for the whole day tomorrow. What should I do? Their daughter, Julie, used to play with me when she was young. She got married last year and moved to a nearby town. Now, only Aunt Matt is at home. Didn't you say that I was unconscious when you saved me? What the hell would I know? All right, I'll tell you something good. Melissa gave birth on the day you woke up. She gave birth to 5 healthy kittens in a row. They look like little mice. Haha, so cute. Oh, congratulations. 5? Yes, 5 kittens. Recently, I've been preparing to name them. You're from the outside world, so you're knowledgeable. Do you have any good suggestions? You don't either? It's okay, just name them casually. I'm going to name them according to their colors. The white ones will be called White Knight, the black ones will be Black Knight, and the flowers. Ahem, that accent. Seeing I'm full. So fast. Are you full? Do you want me to get you some more flatbread? It's no trouble, no trouble. I'm full, I'm really full. Then, you can pack up and leave. I need to rest a little more. Leave? Where to? I have nothing to do today, so I'll stay here and chat with you. I'm good, right? Yeah. Why aren't you talking again? Phew. Because I just want to be a quiet, handsome man. Chapter 1041. Being a handsome man was not something that could be done just because one wanted to. As for being quiet, that was even more of an extravagant hope for Tang, and even felt that the real backlash from this failed scheme was waiting for him. He was covered in bruises and could not go anywhere. He could only lie down and accept the bombardment of words from this conflicted little nun who was as kind as an angel, but as vicious as a demon. Well, let's put this aside for the time being and return to the main topic. Tang already had a general understanding of his internal and external injuries. The conclusion was that he should be crippled in the short term, at least for about a month or so. He would not be able to fight with others. Otherwise, he would really be crippled. From this point of view, Tang was lucky enough to escape from the space turbulence and come to this remote eastern coastline. It was really a good thing. At least it guaranteed that during the healing period, he would not have to worry about being disturbed again. Don't be unhappy. This situation was also because the person who was injured was Tang In. If it was someone else, they would have been buried under the ground for more than 10 days. Most of their bones would have been gnawed by ants. It had to be said that with Tang In's current physique, he deserved to be called abnormal. Although the degree of external defense was not as good as Bamatu, the real magical beast, in other aspects such as self-healing, there was no problem for him to leave the latter behind by a few streets. Other than receiving the holy light treatment from the middle-aged priest called Mason once a day, it was better than nothing. Tang In's injuries were all self-healing. After more than 10 days, the crisscrossing bloody scars on his body were constantly shrinking and healing. The huge body that was previously bloated and fat, like an inflated doll, was rapidly losing weight at a speed visible to the naked eye. He had basically restored the original appearance of Tang. This also made the startled little nun dumbfounded. She looked at Tang In as if she was looking at a monster in human skin. If it were not for the fact that she personally picked up Tang In, she was afraid that she would represent the father to destroy this evil creature that changed every day. Other than that, there was a healing process that was invisible to the naked eye. Every single inch of his torn muscles, every single broken tendon, meridian, and even some damaged internal organs were undergoing tremendous changes. They were ceaselessly wriggling to be reconnected, healed, and regenerated. It was simply a miracle. If this strange change was exposed, there was no doubt that Tang In would instantly become a hot steamed bun in the eyes of those crazy magicians and alchemists. Of course, there would be no more days of peace from then on. Fortunately, there was only a silly little nun and a middle-aged priest who had not seen much of the world. Although they were shocked by Tang In's healing speed, they did not think too much about it. The former even thought that this was the work of the Great Father. Soon after, Tang In also thought that the so-called Great Father God had finally appeared. After the prayer meeting, the talkative little nun had changed her habit of pestering him. She had a worried look on her face for the past few days and did not bother him anymore. That was why it was said that humans were all despicable. Ever since he woke up, Tang In wished that he could find a piece of tape to seal the little nun's mouth. But now that he had not heard her chatter for a few days, Tang In was actually not used to it. Finally, it's time to eat. At noon, the little nun said weakly, put down the food tray, and was about to turn around and leave in a daze. Tang In called out to her, "Cindy, what's wrong with you these days? You look listless." Oh, it's nothing." The little nun hesitated and stopped talking. In the end, she pursed her lips and shook her head. Of course, Tang In did not believe her. Other things aside, she would not have such an indifferent reaction when he called her the most hated Cindy in the past. After thinking for a while, he asked tentatively, "Is it because the name change did not go well?" Well, this needs to be done for a long time. After all, the mouth is on someone else's body, isn't it? Oh, so something happened to Aunt Matt? Didn't you comfort her? No, Auntie Matt has already moved to the neighboring town to live with her daughter. The little nun hesitated for a moment, but still sat on the edge of the bed with Twain's forceful pull. She pouted and said sadly, "It's us who got into trouble. I don't know if we can still keep this church." Tangen was stunned when he heard that. He could not help but ask in surprise, "What's wrong? Did an enemy come knocking? You have enemies too?" Tangen could not be blamed for being puzzled, not to mention that no one dared to provoke the Temple of Light. The key was that there was no reason. There was only a silly girl and an old man who did not know anything about the world. They did not look like troublemakers. No matter how he looked at it, there was no value in making a move here. I don't know if it counts as an enemy. The little nun scratched her head in distress. In fact, they used to be people of the temple and clergy, but now they have betrayed the temple. They are no longer the same as us. They are enemies. I heard that there were several churches in the next area that were taken over by them. They even killed people. Now, they are coming to our place. The little nun's vague statement made Tang and even more confused. But at this time, his heart suddenly moved. He was stunned and asked hesitantly, "You mean Xia Wei? You mean the new sect? Hey, you know about the new sect too?" The little nun was stunned. Her mouth was slightly open and she looked surprised. I'm from the outside. I've heard a little about it. After a few dry laughs, Tang In confirmed his guess from the little nun's reaction. He could not help but look very strange. He did not only know about the new sect. The new sect's leader, Sylvia, had a very close relationship with him. Well, the kind of close relationship that was negative distance. Then, from the unreliable rumors from the little nun, Tang In roughly understood Sylvia's current situation. After all, the Temple of Light was the Temple of Light. Even if the forces in the north had been beaten by Tang In, they were very miserable. But their foundation was there. They still had the power to mobilize people to stop the attack. Compared to the invasion of the wild cult, Tang In's destruction, and so on, Sylvia's team that betrayed the religion and started a new one was the most hated by them. This was no longer shaking the foundation of the Temple of Light. It was a blatant robbery of the believer's foundation. So even though the current situation was chaotic, the Temple of Light's attack on the new sect had not stopped. After Sylvia's team hid here and there for a while, they should have realized that their current strength was far from their old masters. It was not suitable for them to fight head-on. So, they simply shifted their strategy to remote areas, such as the eastern coastline, to slowly develop their propaganda and reserve their strength. This was undoubtedly a good move. Although the Temple of Light had stood on the mainland for thousands of years, its huge forces were intertwined and spread all over the brand. Even in such a remote and backward eastern coastline, they still had their preaching church. But compared to the prosperous areas, their power was undoubtedly much weaker, and their influence was reduced to the minimum. On the contrary, looking at the newly rising new sect, it was a group of pure and perverted Puritans and ascetics. They did not lack strength and faith, compared to the clergy of the Temple of Light who were sanctimonious on the surface, but secretly had a belly full of thieves and prostitutes. They were undoubtedly more popular among the believers. In addition, Sylvia and the others had a great reputation in the mainland. Naturally, they were able to gain a firm foothold here and gradually took over the power and territory of the Temple of Light. Of course, Sylvia and the others had a smooth development. The dilapidated church, like the little nuns, was under more and more pressure. The battle of beliefs was the most cruel. It did not matter whether it was right or wrong, only the standpoint. The little nun and Father Mason would certainly not accept the peaceful incorporation of the new sect. It was not a matter of whether the conditions were good or not. In fact, if they really cared about this, they would not have stayed in this place with no future, guarding this dilapidated church for so many years. What should I do? A few days ago, Uncle Mason talked to me and asked me to leave here, but he did not want to leave. I will not leave. Uncle Mason is here. I am here. Humph, if they dare to come, I will. She raised her little fist and waved it, but found that it was not a deterrent. The little nun pursed her lips and turned her head away. Anyway, I will not leave. I will not leave, even if you chase me away. Looking at the little nun's determined look, Tang and could not help but laugh. He also knew the relationship between her and Father Mason, who saved and raised her, so he did not make fun of her. He asked, "No support? Does the Temple of Light not care about you at all?" "There is. But our place is too remote and not important, so no one came." The little nun lowered her head in frustration. Tang In nodded to show that he understood, and then comforted her. "Don't worry. Maybe the new sect is not as bad as you think. I have heard some news outside. They have a good reputation." "Sylvia, have you heard of them?" "The Flower of Nights is one of the leaders of the new sect. I heard that she was framed by the big shots of the Temple of Light and wanted to kill her, so she rebelled." The little nun's eyes lit up, but soon dimmed and lowered her head. "But they have started to kill people. It's just a rumor. And even if they killed people, there should be a reason." "Haha, the people of the Temple of Light are not as kind as you." Tang Yin smiled and comforted her, but the effect was not obvious. After lunch, he saw the little nun holding a sharpened wooden stick, waving it around in front of the open space in front of the door, accompanied by the scolding from time to time. It was a bit chaotic, but after looking at the sharpened wooden stick, the sharp axe was left unused. Tang Yin shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Cindy, oh Cindy, how can I save this silly girl?" Chapter 1042. P.S. This chapter is close to 5,000 words. Well, it was originally more than 5,000 words, but it was simplified and deleted by the raccoon. It is also a combined chapter of the second and third chapters. Phew! I finally finished writing. The little nun's courage was commendable, but with her thin wooden stick, she naturally could not block anything. What should happen will still happen. But let's move our sight away from here for the time being. Soon, half a month had passed since the day Tang Yin disappeared. It was time for some things to be summarized and reported in stages. Brand's capital, Royal Court Hospital. Just by looking at the name, one could know the significance of this address. In the whole world, this may not be the best place to treat injuries, but it was certainly the most luxurious place to recuperate. Unfortunately, no matter how exquisite the building was, how luxurious the bedding was, and how advanced the furnace was, it could not dissipate the coldness that enveloped this place. On the luxurious bed, the skinny old man's old face was still as pale as paper, as if he was in an ice cellar, trembling from time to time, like a weak flame in the wind and cold rain, about to be extinguished. Who would have thought that this skinny old man, who looked like he was about to reach the end of his life, was actually the god of swords, Wu Ding, who had dominated the continent for hundreds of years and was invincible under his sword. Time was indeed a sharp sword. It was never stingy to leave scars on every living thing. Even if he was an ordinary old man in the mountains, even if he was a world-shaking powerhouse, there was no exception. "Master, you will be fine. You can definitely be cured. The royal court has ordered to find famous doctors from all over the world. There must be a way." Oh yes, His Majesty has also personally written a letter to the Pope of the Temple. They will send someone over soon. Okay, I still don't know the hypocrisy of that bunch of swindlers. Wait for them to come. Not to mention my current state, the gods and demons are helpless. Even if they have a way to treat me, they would rather delay until I die. Compared to the panicked Haita in front of the bed, Wu Ding's expression was much calmer. His tone was flat, as if he was not talking about himself. But this was basically the truth. Wu Ding was well aware of his own body's condition. Birth, old age, sickness, and death, this was common sense. As long as one was human, it was inevitable. Even without the battle on the river, he didn't have much time left to live. Not to mention the fact that he had fought Bamitu to the point where both sides were heavily injured. That was the most accurate description of Wu Ding's current physical condition. With this kind of injury, there was nothing the medical staff could do. In truth, if it wasn't for Wu Ding's heaven-defying cultivation that allowed him to forcefully suppress the injuries in his body would have long since turned cold. Of course, after living to his level, he was no longer afraid of death. Even now, he still hadn't forgotten to belittle the Temple of Light that he had always disliked. However, Haitao wasn't as open-minded. He immediately roared, "How dare they? All right, all right. Wu Ding waved his hand to interrupt him again. He looked at Wen Seelan, who had his hands and head lowered since he came here. His body was covered in dust, but he remained silent. He asked calmly, "The pursuit didn't succeed?" Wen Seelan lowered his head in shame and whispered, "We were about to succeed. Bamitu should also be looking for Tang-un. Recently, he hasn't left the vicinity of Lino River. After more than 10 days of encirclement, we saw that we were about to drag him to death, but he suddenly disappeared. That means he reached a critical point and had no choice but to give up and escape." Nodding lightly, Wu Ding didn't look surprised. He sighed and said, "It seems that wild beasts also have their advantages. Although the sacrificial cultivation method of the northern wilderness tribes has countless drawbacks, it's exceptionally powerful in improving the external body. It's commendable." Wen Seelan couldn't help but nod when he heard this. He couldn't hide the fear on his face. During this period of pursuit, he had really seen how abnormal Bamita was. Even if they couldn't use their true strength, this temporary team of experts couldn't break the defense of the other party's terrifying body that was like a magical beast's. Instead, they were crushed by the other party's rampage and suffered unspeakable misery. What about Tang-in? Bamita hasn't been found. Don't you have any news? Not at all. Wen Seelan shook his head. I used the connections of my family and the royal court to hang his wanted portrait all over the southern part of Bran in the shortest time possible. But so far, there's no news. Oh, Wu Ding sighed softly. His expression was a little complicated. That's really a pity. Haita snorted coldly and said coldly, "That traitor. Not only did he collude with the barbarians and make an enemy of the Bran, but he also invited Bamitu to harm you. Oof. It's best if he's dead. It's not worth feeling pity." Wen Seelan, on the other hand, was slightly stunned when he heard Wu Ding's strange tone. "Master, you mean he's not dead yet? How is that possible?" Wu Ding didn't answer directly. He just shook his head non-committally. "Little Tang-un's martial arts talent is indeed rare in my life. At that time, during the battle on the river, when Bamitu and I were about to die," he paused and recalled the shocking moment when Tang-in stopped the sword annihilation. After pondering for a moment, he inexplicably shook his head. He changed the situation of the battle. He should have found his own unique martial arts. If he can really practice safely, he will surpass everyone and become the new king of martial arts on this continent. So if he dies, it's a pity. Pause for a while, he continued. Of course, he's now the enemy of the Bran after all. If he really dies, it's also a good thing. I'm just afraid that he's not dead. It's been more than half a month now. If he successfully escapes from the space turbulence, and we can't find him here, then we won't have a chance to kill him. So it's a pity. No, it can't be. His injuries, that's not important. As long as he's not dead, in terms of survival ability, he's much stronger than me and Bamitu. Haita and Wen Seelan couldn't help but be silent. This was the truth. They had seen and even experienced Tang-un's methods. As long as they didn't close their eyes, no matter how serious their injuries were, even if he was now in the south of the Bran, they didn't have the slightest confidence in finding him. Okay, let's not talk about him. You shouldn't care too much about him. The most important thing now is the situation in the Bran. Wu Ding looked up at the two and asked, I remember that when I went, the military had already sent troops to the north to suppress them. Now that half a month has passed, how's the battle over there? Has the Grey Coat army been suppressed? Haita and Wen Seelan glanced at each other and lowered their heads. This time, it was a real silence. At this time, in a plain in the hinterland of the north, a crucial battle had already come to an end. Corpses were everywhere, lying in all kinds of different shapes. The red blood that spread wantonly dyed the wild grass and white flowers red, and also dyed the deep ground red. The cold wind swept past, and the broken blades trembled slightly, humming softly. The victor was self-evident, because the victors had already begun to clean up the battlefield. If someone with a little knowledge of military affairs was here, they would be able to tell that these corpses were the regular soldiers of the Roaring Tiger Legion, Bran's main force station in the south, the standard armor on the corpses, and the large war machines that were being dragged to the rear. especially the flags that were being stepped on, and they would recognize that these corpses were the regular soldiers of the Roaring Tiger Legion, Bran's main force station in the south. Yes, this was a main force that the Bran army had sent from the south to suppress the Greycoat army, as Wu Ding had said. But from the current situation, well, fate wasn't very good. This battle is settled. All the Bran cities within 100 miles will be under our control. This is the main force of the Bran? It seems that their combat power is only SOSO. You have the nerve to brag? It's easy to say if you command. Where's Miss Lan Sha? What miss? You have to call her Marshal Lan Sha. Hello, leader. In the frontline command, seeing that they had won another crucial battle, the generals and officers of the Greycoat army were very excited, either laughing or bragging to the sky. The atmosphere was lively and noisy. Even when leader Josiah walked in from outside the tent, no one noticed. Josiah waved his hand to stop the officer who was overjoyed and bowed to apologize. He glanced at the slightly quiet tent and finally looked at Fry. Miss Lan Sha is not here. She just went out, maybe to observe the battlefield. There is still a small part of the Bran army that hasn't been eliminated. Leader, are you looking for her? I'll send someone to inform her. Oh, it's nothing. A few miles away from the tent, Lan Sha didn't observe the battlefield as Fry said. Instead, she turned into a small forest in a valley in a good mood. Grandpa Bam Mutu, you're finally back. Lan Sha waved her hand in greeting when she saw Bam Mutu, who couldn't hide his dispirited expression. Then, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. He glanced around Bam Mutu, but it was empty. He realized something, and the smile that had just appeared at the corner of his mouth instantly disappeared without a trace. His body swayed slightly, and when he looked up, the dazzling white light and a sense of dizziness suddenly rushed over him like a tide. I'm sorry, girl. Tangan is gone. Lan Sha didn't know what she heard after that, and how she walked out of the small forest. He staggered and turned a blind eye to the salutes and greetings of the soldiers passing by, as if he did not hear them. In her dizzy mind, there was only a voice that kept circling and repeating in her mind, Tang-un is gone. Tangan is gone. How could he be gone? You have broken through the northern wilderness tribes, stayed in the imperial city, and entered the military camp. How could he be gone now? Weren't you the one who brought me here? Why are you hiding yourself now? Didn't you promise me that you would come back safely, liar? Miss Lan Sha? Miss Lan Sha? Lan Sha? Calls far and near, sometimes clear and sometimes vague, came into her ears. Lan Sha came back to her senses, and then she realized that she had returned to the temporary headquarters without knowing when. Fry and the other generals and officers were standing in front of her, looking at her with a worried face. She turned her head and saw Josiah, who was frowning slightly and holding her arm, looking puzzled. She took a slight breath and calmed down. What's wrong? Nothing, Miss Lan Sha. Just now you. She stared at Joshua's inexplicable face and paused for a moment. Then, she casually averted her gaze. Sorry, I was too engrossed in thinking about the tactical arrangement just now, so... She shrugged, played it down, and glossed over it. I promised you, this is a secret between the two of us. I'm not like you. I'm not a liar. So, I will continue to help you keep this secret. Apart from commanding the battle, Lan Sha's attitude had always been cold. Fry and the others were used to it. Oh, that's good. By the way, the leader just said that he was looking for you. Hearing this, Lan Sha turned her head again and met Josiah's suspicious gaze. She asked directly, "What's the matter?" She shook her head subconsciously. Nothing important. In fact, what Josiah wanted to ask was about Tangan. No one was a fool, and Josiah was even more so. Although he was fooled by Lan Sha's superb acting when he first tested him, it was impossible for him not to be suspicious. Now, Tangan had been away for more than a month and had not returned for a long time. Josiah felt more and more that there was something wrong with this. Recently, he had been testing Lan Sha frequently. That's good. I have something to ask you. Suddenly thinking of something, Lan Sha, who was about to turn and leave, stopped abruptly. She turned her head and asked calmly, "Am I now the commander-in-chief of the army?" "Of course." Then, as the commander-in-chief of the army, It is not too much to give some orders about the battle, right? What are you trying to say? Josiah was alert and frowned, asking in return. Lan Sha did not answer. She looked at Fry and asked again, how many prisoners of war did our army capture in this battle? I haven't had time to calculate the exact number. About 3,000. If we take down those who are still stubbornly resisting in the encirclement, there should be more. Although it was a little strange, Fry gave a rough estimate after thinking for a while. He nodded. Good. Speed is the most important thing in war. In the next few days, we have to take over all the important cities and towns within 100 miles before Brand's reinforcements arrive. So I ordered, after a pause, she said expressionlessly, kill all the prisoners on the spot and advance with light armor. Kill all of them. That's not good. Even though Lan Sha had laid down layers upon layers, everyone had already subconsciously prepared themselves mentally. But when they really heard Lan Sha's big plan, they still could not help but gasp. If the two armies were facing each other on the battlefield, no one would say anything no matter how many enemies were killed. On the contrary, this was a reflection of one's ability, and one would be praised and rewarded. But after the battle, killing prisoners who had already surrendered and 3,000 people who were still alive at this moment, even the generals and officers who were used to seeing bloody battles looked at the pretty Lan Sha in front of them with a hint of fear in their eyes. Damn it. You really can't judge a person by their appearance. I don't agree. Josiah instantly frowned and rejected. It's not appropriate to kill the prisoners. And once word gets out, how will the people view the Gray Coat Army? Will they still dare to support us? Then let them go and return some weapons. Then just make up a reason to rebel and kill them. How about it? What's the difference between doing this and directly killing them? I'm the commander of the army. This is not a suggestion. It's an order, a military order. Suddenly, Lan Sha roared angrily. Without any warning, he suddenly exploded, instantly causing the field to fall silent. It was not because they were scared, but because they were shocked. All the generals and officers of the Gray Coat Army, including Josiah and Fry, had never seen Lan Sha, who was usually arrogant, cold, and calm in battle, have such strong emotional fluctuations since they first came into contact with him. Phew! Sorry, I lost my composure. After the outburst, Lan Sha instantly realized the emotional problem. He took a deep breath and forced down the agitation in his heart. He looked at the stunned Josiah and chuckled. That's what I meant, and I won't change it. Of course, you're the leader of the Gray Coat Army. You're the most important. That's all. I'm tired. I'll go and rest first. He bowed slightly, saluted, and turned to leave. After a few steps, he stopped and said without turning his head, General Fry, please be in charge of cleaning up the battlefield and organizing the army. After 2 hours, the army will set off and attack. After he finished speaking, he left the people who subconsciously returned the salute and left. I don't believe that you'll die so easily. I'll wait here for you to come back. But before you come back, I'll treat you as dead and avenge you. After a moment, Leader, Fry came back to his senses and looked at Josiah with slight hesitation. He took the lead to break the silence and waited for a decision. Of course, it was not the decision to clean up the battlefield and organize the army. It was the bloody decision to kill the 3,000 captives. I've never been here before. Josiah looked in the direction where Lan Sha disappeared, pursed his lips, and turned to leave as well. Do as you see fit. Josiah chose to leave, and there were no more senior civil officials of the Gray Coat Army in the field. Only this group of generals and officers who were in actual combat were left, and soldiers, of course, had to obey the military orders of their superiors. In this way, the meaning of do as you see fit was self-evident. Yes, Fry licked his lips subconsciously, revealing a bloodthirsty and ferocious look. Skinny monkey, I'll give you 15 minutes to gather some of your tight-lipped brothers. Everyone go. After you're done, I'll treat everyone to drinks. Chapter 1043. Never underestimate the destructive power of a woman, especially when she was already crazy. After defeating the Brand's reinforcements and winning a crucial battle, Blank's army, which was retreating in defeat, was horrified to find that the Gray Coat army, which was already unstoppable, seemed to be even crazier. They attacked from all directions, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Frequent lightning-fast raids. Once they succeeded, they didn't look at the results of the battle or clean up the battlefield. They continued to rush forward, chasing and killing. In just a few days, the Gray Coat army swept across thousands of miles like a ferocious tiger, crazily occupying more than a dozen towns like locusts, wantonly sweeping in all directions. It wasn't just a matter of speeding up the pace. What was more terrifying was that this Gray Coat army suddenly changed the demeanor of a king's army in the past and became more bloodthirsty and manic. Once they entered the battlefield, as long as there was still an enemy soldier standing on the field, there was only the bugle horn to charge in their ears. There was no sound of retreat. It didn't matter if the enemy threw away their weapons and surrendered. It didn't matter if the enemy knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. What greeted them was only a knife to the head, and they might as well behead them. Kill, kill, kill. There was no need for spoils of war, no need for prisoners of war, and no need for rest and reorganization. The red-eyed Gray Coat army was like a heavy chariot charging at high speed with a rumbling sound. Not only did they crush Blank's army, but they also crushed a path of flesh and blood. At this time, their own side couldn't stop at all. The officers passed down the military orders, and the soldiers were responsible for killing the enemy. The division of labor was clear, and the upper and lower levels were condensed into a battle rope, completely controlled by the frosty figure on the chariot. Wherever the chariot pointed, they would hit and ravage the enemy. This abnormal situation was undoubtedly extremely dangerous, not only for the Blank's army that retreated in fear, but also for the Gray Coat army itself. Throughout the 1,000 years of war history of the continent, there had never been such an arrogant army, nor such crazy tactics. As long as there was a mistake, a defeat, this high-speed chariot would be in danger of losing control and collapse. But the reality was that for half a month, no matter how the Brand generals calculated and blocked, in the end, they fell under the rolling wheels one after another, mercilessly crushed. The figure controlling the war chariot was like an emotionless machine, tireless, flawless, and so accurate that it made people despair. This was a crazy battle that was out of the mainstream. It was also a ruthless revenge from a woman who was on the verge of madness. Just as the Gray Coat army was stirring up a bloody storm in the northern hinterland of Bran, on the eastern coastline, Tang In, who had watched the ebb and flow of the sea for a whole month, finally managed to control his internal and external injuries and was able to walk around normally like a normal person. This was a miracle that was worth celebrating. It should be noted that Wu Ding and Bamadou had similar injuries. One of them was lying in bed for a long time, dying, while the other was hiding in the dark, licking his wounds. He couldn't see anyone at all, let alone wander around aimlessly. Of course, being able to walk around meant that Tang In was not far from leaving this place. It was not that he didn't want to recuperate. After all, his injuries were not completely healed, at least his strength had not recovered. But Tang In knew that he had disappeared for a long time. He didn't know how chaotic the outside world was, especially to Josiah and Lan Sha. However, before Tang In could find a chance to say goodbye, the little nun, who had been worried about the trouble for half a month, finally came to find him. In fact, there were signs. Especially a few days ago, in a small town dozens of miles away from here, when the forces that came to help the temple were wiped out overnight, Tang In had a premonition. But the little nun still had a fluke heart, thinking that they were not in an important place. Well, the key was that the church was too shabby and the incense was not strong. Maybe the new stream would not like it. Unfortunately, what would come would still come. At noon, Twain was imitating the old butler, squinting his eyes as he reclined on a handmade rattan chair in the courtyard, basking in the sun lazily and sniffing the slightly fishy sea breeze. Suddenly, the little nun rushed in as if she had caught fire and screamed, "Arthur! Arthur! They're here, Who's here?" After staying here for so long, Tang had become accustomed to the little nun's startled character. As he asked casually without any change in his expression, he opened his eyes helplessly and looked at the little nun running around the courtyard like a headless fly, as if she was looking for something. Then, his eyes brightened, and he went straight to the corner of the courtyard to pick up the wooden stick that she had been cultivating for more than half a month. He then rushed out of the courtyard without looking back, as if he was trying to put out a fire. Those bastards! Go quickly! I'm going to save Uncle Myson. Ouch! She exclaimed with a thud. She must have fallen down. After a slight pause, Tang Yin grinned when he realized who those bastards were. You're still going to save others. TSK, how loyal. He shook his head and touched the rattan chair under his hand. What a pity. I just finished building you, and you're already taken advantage of by others. He got up and went back to the house to tidy up. He then closed the wooden door and walked to the main hall in front of the church unhurriedly. The church was built on a cliff beside the fishing village, occupying a very small area. Usually, no one would come here unless it was a weekend prayer meeting. As such, when Tang Yin walked out of the front hall and saw two knights in light armor guarding the door, the identity of the other party was naturally self-evident. Before he entered, the little nun's high-pitched scream came from the hall. Go. You're not welcome here. Leave now. I don't care what you're here for if you don't leave. Don't blame me for being rude. Cindy, who sent you here, put down the wooden stick. Seeing it's seeing. Uncle Myson, don't be afraid of them. I'm telling you, even I'm afraid of myself when I go crazy. Don't force me, Ugh. Screams, shouts, and the whistling of the wind mixed with the waving of the wooden stick. It was obvious that the hall was in a mess. Looking at the two new church knights whose eyes were twitching, Tang Yin held his forehead and walked quickly to the main hall. The two new church knights looked at Tang and did not stop Tang Yin from entering. It was unknown whether they thought it was unnecessary or they just did not care. When he walked into the hall, he saw the little nun standing in front of a middle-aged man like a little tigress, who was the only priest here, Father Myson. He closed his eyes and waved the wooden stick in a fan shape, creating a whistling wind. The two strangers in plain robes were forced to retreat, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Please don't misunderstand, Sister Cindy. We just want to ask a few questions. Cindy, don't mess around. Seeing. My name is Seeing. Ugh. All right, Sister Seeing. Can you put away the wooden stick first? We mean no harm, at least not for now. I'm not listening. Go now. The little nun who had heard a lot of rumors about the new church would not believe them so easily. She wanted to protect Father Myson, who was just like her father, and beat the bad guys in front of her. Of course, this was just her wishful thinking. Not to mention that the two Puritans in plain robes were not weak. Even an ordinary adult man could easily stop the little nun who was waving the wooden stick. After a few failed attempts to negotiate, one of the middle-aged Puritans frowned and reached out his hand to take the wooden stick. But just as he raised his hand, a palm suddenly reached out from behind and gently pressed on his wrist. The middle-aged Puritan, who did not notice someone approaching suddenly, turned his head and saw a smiling face in front of him. Sorry. This child hates it when people call her Cindy. She goes berserk when she hears it. Haha, I'm sorry. While laughing, he grabbed the wooden stick beside him without turning his head. All right, Cindy. They are all guests. Let's see what they have to say first. If you're not satisfied, you can use your ultimate move. The wooden stick was restrained, and Father Myson quickly reached out from behind the little nun. Tang Yin let go of the wooden stick and threw it aside. The little nun came back to her senses and suddenly widened her eyes. She pointed at Tang Yin with grief and indignation. Arthur, you are with them, ouch. Bang, he grinned and knocked on the little nun's forehead. Go get 2 cups of tea. Covering her forehead, the little nun responded subconsciously. Her palm-sized face was full of grievance and confusion. Sir, are you also a clergyman here? The middle-aged Puritan who was held by the wrist looked at Tang Yin with vigilance. Me? I'm just passing by. Tang Yin smiled and put his arm around the little nun's shoulder, but now I am with her. Chapter 1044. The onlooker sees more clearly than the person involved. Tang Yin knew what kind of person Sylvia was and what kind of personality she had. Although Tang Yin had never come into contact with the Puritans and ascetics who rebelled with Sylvia, he could roughly guess their general nature since they were recognized by Sylvia and ended up in such a miserable state in the temple. Most importantly, when he saw the two knights guarding the door and heard the chaos in the hall, they did not go in as the vanguard. When the two Puritans saw the little nun waving the wooden stick around, they did not know whether to laugh or cry, and explained instead of turning hostile. Tang Yin could confirm that the other party did not have much malicious intent this time, at least not for the time being. In other words, the little nun's previous bravery was in vain. Sure enough, what happened next quickly confirmed Tang Yin's conjecture. Father Mason, sorry to disturb you. We are here to ask a few questions. Well, maybe from our current position, we do not have the right to ask these questions. But from the devout faith of thousands of believers here, I hope you can answer truthfully. No problem, go ahead. Okay, how much donations does the temple receive every month? This, about 5 gold coins, right? If you include the free food and other items, the value is about 10 gold coins. The general whereabouts of these donations. What do you mean? Are you suspecting us of stealing the donations? Just asking, Sister Exant. Sister Sing, don't misunderstand. Misunderstand? Oof. What if I eat it all by myself? Me too. I have eaten a lot this month too. Cindy, don't be ridiculous. Pause for a while, ignoring the sensitive little nun who kept correcting Seeing and Seeing's complaints. He patiently replied, here's the thing. In the fishing village at the foot of the mountain, there are many orphans whose parents died at sea. Most of these donations are used to purchase food, winter clothes, and so on. Is there an account? Of course, the account book is in the wooden cabinet at the back. It's public. I'll get it for you to see. After a few questions and answers, the two uninvited New Stream Puritans did not look like uninvited guests, but more like important figures of the Divine Hall who came to inspect. Although it seemed like he was trying to pick a fight, he was actually modest and gentle. It was just a normal questioning attitude. Other than the little nun who was still full of resentment, Father Meissen quickly calmed down. Although he did not understand the intention of the other party's question, he did not think that there was anything to hide, so he directly told the truth without any hesitation. Tang Yin sat next to the little nun and listened for a while. He roughly understood the purpose of the two Protestant Puritans' visit. If he was not mistaken, the latter asked these questions to investigate Father Meissen's character. Regarding this, Tang Yin dared to guarantee that there was no problem. This was because he had already investigated this matter in secret. Well, in view of his previous bad impression, Tang Yin did not have a good impression of the clergy of the temple. Even if Father Meissen was his savior, he also had the idea of exposing his hypocrisy. He also wanted to make sure that the silly little nun would not be harmed in the future. After Tang Yin could move normally, he immediately began to investigate Father Meissen carefully and comprehensively. In the end, he had to admit that there were indeed all kinds of birds in the forest. There were thieves and good birds. The old man who did not care about worldly affairs and stayed in this dilapidated little church for half of his life was a good bird through and through. Even if Tang Yin, who failed to investigate, pretended to unintentionally reveal that he had a huge amount of money on him, this old man did not see that he could not move at all and had the intention to harm him. Instead, he reminded him to be careful and to keep it a secret. He also sincerely said something like not showing off one's wealth. This made Tang Yin, who had always been unprincipled, secretly feel ashamed, of course. Such a weirdo would not do something like embezzling the donations. Sure enough, after carefully reading the account book, the two Puritans looked at each other, shook their heads, and put down the account book in their hands. Of course, they could not come to any conclusion in such a short time. Obviously, they had secretly investigated Father Meissen before they came here. Now, they just wanted to verify it again. Finished reading, did we use the donations secretly? Staring at them fiercely, the little nun didn't let them off. If you don't, the door is behind you. Shouldn't you be leaving? Of course. The two Puritans would not lower themselves to the little nun's level. They just looked a little embarrassed. Ahem, it seems that Sister Seeing has a deep prejudice against us. How would I dare? Rumor has it that you can kill people. Cindy. Father Meissen quickly interrupted the little nun's mocking murmur and smiled bitterly. Wasn't this just a reminder to anger her? He smiled and nodded to the two Puritans who were slightly stiff. Sorry, didn't mean to talk nonsense. It's not all nonsense. The middle-aged Puritan glanced at Tang, who was bored listening to them. He still could not see the depth of the matter. He calmly looked away and said with a smile, "The reputation of the new religion is not very good. There are rumors that are true and malicious slander. There are killings that Sister Seeing said just now, but we prefer to call it trial." Pause for a while, he continued, "We were all clergy before, so there are some things that I will not hide. Now, the temple is rotten to the core. Not only the people in the headquarters are greedy, but the managers of the churches are even more greedy. The more remote and inconspicuous the place is, the more shocking the conspiracy is. Do you believe it? Just like in a small church like yours, we have found baskets of gold coins and rescued countless young women who were imprisoned in the basement. Some of them were nuns, some were believers. How is that possible?" Father Meissen exclaimed in a trembling voice. His face was full of horror and disbelief. The little nun was even more dumbfounded when she heard this. Her mouth was slightly open and she looked stunned. Tang curled his lips and was not surprised at all. "How is it impossible? You two are the ones who are not mainstream, okay." Spreading his hands, he said, "Before we really found it, we also thought it was impossible. Some people even have a good reputation in the neighboring villages. They are kind and don't look like bullies. But that is the truth. If you want to see, we have a lot of examples to prove it. Or you can go to the north and listen to what the believers there have to say." Shaking his head, the middle-aged Puritan smiled and looked at the stunned little nun. He asked, "Such vermin, don't you think we should kill them?" Aye. The little nun, who was seriously shocked, subconsciously shrank into Tang Un's arm like a kitten. She completely lost her tigress demeanor. She was lucky because she followed the eccentric Father Meissen and never encountered such an ugly situation. She was also unlucky because she was too well protected. She was shocked when she encountered such a shady situation. Patting the little nun's shoulder comfortingly, Tang calmly raised his head and looked at the middle-aged Puritan. "Those who should be killed have been killed. Now the question is, how are you going to treat Father Meissen in this small church?" The two Puritans were stunned when they heard this. They looked at Tang again, especially at the latter's calm and ordinary face. They paused and frowned with vigilance. "We have neglected you just now. You don't seem to be from here." With Tang Un's strength, even if he was injured, the two Puritans would not be able to find any clues from him. But the key was that Tang Un was too calm now. He was just sitting there quietly, like an iceberg that no one could approach. At first glance, they knew that he was not someone to be trifled with. Waving his hand, he interrupted, "Let's talk about the solution first. Identity is not important." Indeed, it was not important. If the solution satisfied Tang In, then everything would be fine. If not, Tang didn't mind cleaning up the church for Sylvia. After a pause, the two Puritans exchanged glances and nodded slightly. They looked at Father Meissen and said, "We have heard about Father Meissen's conduct when we came here. We admire him very much. Now there are two choices. One is that we hope that Father Meissen can consider joining our new church and restore the pure faith of the Father. Just consider, of course, like Father Meissen, who really preaches the gospel of the Father by example, actually walks the same path as us. We will only give respect and not force. He can continue to stay in the temple and not join us. Of course, the door of our new church will always be open for him. This is the second choice." "Good." Tang nodded with satisfaction and stood up. "Let Father Meissen think about it. This choice can't be made in a short time. Can I have a word with you two?" "Of course." The two Puritans looked deeply at Tang Un and stood up. "We will wait outside." Looking at the two figures disappearing at the door, Tang In bowed his head and touched the little nun's hair. Cindy, thank you for saving my life and taking care of me for so many days. But, well, it's time for me to leave. Ah. The little nun, who was shocked, was even more dumbfounded. She looked up blankly. Leave? Arthur, where are you going? Home. Oh. The little nun lowered her head and stared at her toes, whispering, Can't you stay for a few more days? Your injury hasn't healed yet. It's okay. I have to leave eventually. In fact, Tang and should have left a few days ago. However, during this period of recuperation, Tang In really liked the seemingly boring but actually plain seaside life here. He also liked this little girl who was always nagging endlessly from the bottom of his heart. It could be considered selfishness. After having a premonition that the new stream would come, Tang In found a reason for himself to return the favor and stayed for a few more days. Now that the new stream had indeed come, and their attitude was not bad, Tang In was also very satisfied with the way things were handled, so he had to leave. You know what? You changed my impression of the temple and the clergy. Well, it's amazing. Also, I still think Cindy's name sounds better. Otherwise, you don't have to change it. Seeing? My name is Seeing. The little nun shook her head to avoid Tang In's touch. She turned her back and said in a muffled voice, Go, go. Anyway, you don't like to listen to me. It's no big deal if you leave. Oomph. Startled, Tang In shook his head and laughed. He did not mind because he clearly heard the sound of tears falling on the ground. He waved his hand and said, Then I'll go first. Father Myson, thank you for healing me for so long. Well, I know a little about the new church. They shouldn't lie to you. Think about it carefully. After finishing his words, he bowed and saluted. He looked at the little nun who was trembling on his shoulder again and smiled slightly. He turned around and walked out of the hall. Outside the hall, 2 Puritans and 2 light armored knights were waiting not far away. They must have guessed and discussed it. They looked a little vigilant. Sir, give this to Sylvia. Tang In was not in the mood to talk at all. He directly threw a folded piece of paper into the middle-aged Puritan's hand. This simple move was enough to make the latter's expression change. Say it's a gift from an old friend. Also, if Father Myson and the little nun don't agree, no one is allowed to touch this small church. That's what I said. After finishing his words, he did not care about the few people who were stunned. He simply stepped on the stairs and disappeared in an instant. Tang In ran to the mountainside in one breath. He did not slow down until the wound on his chest was slightly painful. He thought for a while and shook his head. He laughed at himself. Ha! I can't even completely let go of the sorrow of parting. It seems that I'm not cut out to be an assassin. Of course, this was a joke. As long as one was a human who would not be afraid of the pain of parting, even if it was just a brief and sad parting after a brief encounter. However, before Tang In could finish his words, suddenly, a high-pitched scream came from the mountain. It was familiar and as sharp as ever. Big bad guy, you lied to me. You said that Seeing was beautiful, and now you said that Cindy is beautiful. Liar. But I'm magnanimous, and I forgive you. My name is Cindy, and I won't change it. Also, remember to come back to see me and bring me delicious food. Otherwise, I'll curse you in front of Father God. Ha! He paused for a moment. After a while, a slow laughter came back to the mountaintop. Ha, I know, Cindy. Little girl. Chapter 1045. The long-range teleportation array from the south of Brand to the north had been completely destroyed by Tang In a month ago. This wasn't something that could be fixed just by changing the parts. After all, it was something from ancient times. There weren't many people who knew about it now. Therefore, it was a big problem whether it could be fixed in half a year, let alone a short month. Of course, only the teleportation array from the south to the north was destroyed. The teleportation array in the north was still working. Therefore, Tang In's exile to the eastern coastline seemed to be far away. In fact, it was not a long time ago back. As long as the route was planned well, a week was more than enough. It was only a week. Tang In did not think it was long. It was completely acceptable. After all, it was already a miracle that he was able to come out of the spatial turbulence by luck. How could he dare to ask for more? Of course, if Tang In knew that the Gray Coat Army was doing crazy things under the command of a crazy woman, it was hard to say if he would still be so calm. Well, the days of traveling are always boring. Why don't we temporarily turn our attention back to the little church on the cliff by the sea again? The little nun was not in a good mood these days. Even if she finally confirmed that her name was constantly changing, she still felt inexplicably angry and irritable. It should be said that the little nun's life was really boring. For more than 10 years, she accompanied an old man who did not like to talk, guarded this dilapidated little church, and guarded this lonely sea. Normal people could not stand it, let alone someone like her who was in her prime. However, the real problem was not this. She had long been used to such a life. Perhaps she was just temporarily not used to it. The little nun loved to pick up things from the outside. She had everything: beautiful wild flowers, strange shells, lame puppies, and a female cat she named Melissa. It seemed like she was picking up scraps, but she did not care because these things could bring her novel feelings, joy, or sadness. Now that she had finally found someone who could listen to her and communicate with her, even if she was often attacked and ridiculed, she was really satisfied and happy. However, good things did not last long. The other party left so soon. Black Knight, do you think Arthur will remember to come and play with us? Squatting on the steps of the courtyard without a care for her image, the little nun's hair drooped down as she teased a few newborn kittens that had yet to open their eyes. She asked with a pout, "Meow." It was a soft meow. Of course, it was not an answer. It was just the little black cat sniffing left and right to find a target, as if it was food. It opened its small mouth that only had a few baby teeth and barely managed to bite the little nun's finger into its mouth. It bit left and right, persistently grinding its teeth. Feeling the ticklish sensation on her finger, the little nun couldn't help but chuckle twice. Her mood improved a little. "You said so? Then do you know what his true identity is?" Ever since he left, there have been a few more armored men at the foot of the mountain. They seem to be guarding the mountain gate for us. They are too polite. They salute me the moment they see me. The little nun was innocent, not stupid. Tangan had mentioned before that there was a problem with his identity. However, from the fact that he never got tired of using Arthur's fake name, she knew that it was definitely made up on a whim. Now, looking at the people from the news stream who were not only courteous, but also overly courteous, the little nun could certainly guess that Twain was hiding something. "Humph, he is indeed a liar. Cindy, you're here." Just when the little nun picked up the little black cat and placed it on her lap and was ready to start her chatter, Father Meissen suddenly rushed into the courtyard and pulled her up. "Quick, they're guests. Come with me to the foot of the mountain to welcome them." "Ah, Kitty fell. Who are we welcoming?" "I don't know. The knights at the foot of the mountain just came up to inform us. I heard that it's a big shot of the news stream." Oh, the news stream again. Thinking that it was Arthur's return, the little nun's surprise was instantly shattered. The little nun pouted and was dragged along listlessly. "So what if they're here? What's the big deal?" "Uncle, are you planning to join the news stream?" "I haven't thought about it yet. When I have time, I'll go to the news stream's territory and see if what they said before is true. If it is, then we'll talk about it later." "Sigh, let's not talk about this first. Let's go, don't be rude." "I am rude." If it wasn't for them, Arthur wouldn't be in a hurry to leave. Keep your stubbornness. Talk nicely later. Don't cause trouble, okay? Otherwise, I can't save you." She straightened her neck and shouted, "I won't. If they have the ability, they can kill me. Arthur will avenge me." Ouch, my ear, it hurts. It was too late to welcome them. When the two awkwardly walked to the front yard, before they stepped on the stone steps down the mountain, they saw a group of knights escorting a carriage to the foot of the mountain. Behind them, there were curious fishermen who followed them. They looked from afar and pointed at them. Others are riding horses while he's in a carriage. Squinting, they saw a figure walking down the carriage, surrounded by people. Without waiting to welcome them, he walked up the stairs directly. The little nun curled her lips. "He's quite arrogant." "Shut up." Mason pulled the little nun down the stone steps with a dark face and nagged. "No matter what, he used to be a clergyman. It's only right to welcome him. Don't show your face to others later. Do you hear me?" "I hear you." Seeing Myson raise his arm again, the little nun dragged her tone and wisely agreed. One up and one down, their speed was not slow. When the little nun and the old man reached the mountainside, they could clearly see the group of people not far away. When they saw the big shot walking at the front, they could not help but be startled. They looked at each other and said, "Women." It was indeed a woman, and a strange woman full of heroic spirit with a different kind of charm that was not inferior to men. "Father Mason, Sister Seeing?" While the little nun and Mason were in a daze, the heroic woman had already arrived in front of them. She stopped and took the lead to greet them with a faint and warm smile. Yes, it's Cindy." The little nun subconsciously corrected her and added, "I changed my name. Now I'm called Cindy." The resentment she felt when she came disappeared in an instant because the little nun found herself standing in front of the other party without confidence, like an ugly duckling. "Oh, I'm sorry, Sister Cindy." Slightly stunned, the heroic woman nodded and smiled. Then she stepped back and bowed. "Nice to meet you. I'm Sylvia." With their mouths slightly open, Father Mason and the little nun were stunned on the spot. They were like statues and even forgot to return the greeting. A person's name was like a tree shadow. Influence seemed invisible and intangible, but in fact it really existed and followed like a shadow. It was impossible to get rid of it even if one wanted to. Sylvia's reputation was really needless to say. Even if it was not as famous as Wu Ding, the god of swords, it was at least a well-known corner. Whether it was in the Bulan Kingdom or in the faraway northern wilderness tribes, this name, this beautiful appearance, this spear, and this battle record were all frequently mentioned by people. It was so outside, not to mention inside the temple. There was no concept of idols in this world, but as the only female among the 12 knights of the temple, Sylvia was definitely an idol-level existence in the hearts of the people of the temple, especially in the field of the middle and lower clergy. Now that the legendary idol suddenly appeared in front of them, one could imagine how the little nun's mood was chaotic, very chaotic, quite chaotic. "He's injured? Is it serious? I heard that you saved him on the beach. He lived here for a month? Is it this room? Hee. This rattan chair was made by him, right? He likes to fiddle with these strange things that—" "Master, are you talking about Arthur?" Sylvia's arrival not only shocked the little nun, but also confused them. They knew that Sylvia was one of the leaders of the new stream, but they couldn't figure out why Xiao Weian was here. Could it be that there was something here that could be linked to her? Yes. Mason thought for a while and finally thought of the young man who had been recuperating here for more than a month. Only this episode of sudden arrival and quick departure could be related to Sylvia. Sylvia did not have any intention to hide. After entering the church, she directly asked about Tangan. To be honest, although Tangan had lived here for more than a month, his relationship with Mason was really ordinary. Other than the treatment once a day, the two basically did not communicate. Thinking of this, Mason led Sylvia to the hospital where Tang stayed. He gave the little nun a wink and turned around to leave. However, although the little nun had been following him, her brain was in a blank state and did not see the wink at all. It was only after Sylvia asked a few questions during the visit that she reacted in a daze. That Master Sylvia mentioned seemed to be Arthur. Arthur? Oh, he sometimes goes by this name. After a pause, Sylvia thought of something and shook her head with a smile. She then looked up and down at the little nun and smiled. "But the next time you see him, you can call him Tang-un. That's his real name." "Ah." The little nun blinked blankly. "He doesn't like his real name either?" Of course, Sylvia did not know this joke. She just thought that the little nun was angry that she was deceived. She waved her hand and explained, "Don't misunderstand. He didn't mean to deceive you. He changed his name for the sake of himself and for the sake of all of you. After all, his name doesn't have a good reputation, especially for the Temple of Light." "Oh." The little nun nodded as if she did not fully understand. "Can you tell me more about him? For example, how you saved him and his injuries at the time?" Pausing, Xiao Weian suddenly frowned slightly. She subconsciously stroked her lower abdomen and sighed softly. Then she pointed to the rattan chair in the courtyard under the sunlight. Can I sit there? Of course. Thank you. After a period of buffer, coupled with Sylvia's pleasant attitude from beginning to end, the little nun finally recovered from the huge shock of seeing her idol in person. She took a deep breath and raised her hand to knock her little head, secretly scolding herself for being useless. Then, she walked into the courtyard a little dejectedly. She watched as Sylvia turned around lightly, one hand holding the handle of the rattan chair and the other gently stroking her lower abdomen as she slowly sat down. After all, as a woman, the little nun who had sobered up instantly noticed that her idol's behavior was a little strange. It seemed like she was a little too careful, but she was just sitting down. She was stunned and suddenly realized something. She subconsciously stared at Sylvia's lower abdomen and said bluntly, "My lady," following the little nun's line of sight. Sylvia looked down at her lower abdomen and casually shook her head. "Oh, it's nothing. It's just an accident." "Well, tell me more about him. I want to hear." Chapter 1046. There were accidents everywhere. The only difference was the nature. Some of them were beautiful or kind. Some of them were shocked, and some were even horrified. What the F***? Tang In, who had been running between cities with long-distance teleportation portals without stopping for a moment, finally returned to the mainstream world at the end of the week, which was the relatively more prosperous northern hinterland. Then, he found a branch of a secret intelligence agency and flipped through a thick stack of information about the recent crazy battles of the Grey Coat Army. His long and narrow eyes stared blankly for a long time, unable to come back to his senses. This kind of shock, speechlessness, and indescribable, inexplicable emotions. Subconsciously, he could only say, "What the F***? This is a big accident. I only went out to recuperate for a month, ate and drank well, and even made a friend. How did this become a revenge scene where she gnashed her teeth and pursued you relentlessly? Even if she didn't bite you to death, she would die with you." It was indeed not difficult to guess. Once the information was in his hands, Tang In roughly guessed the inside story. The one leading the Grey Coat Army was now Lan Sha. She knew that they had gone to cause trouble for Wu Ding. Now that Bamatu should have returned, but he did not return safely. Naturally, it was self-evident what this meant. This woman was crazy. TSK, should I say that you are loyal, or should I say that you... After a pause, Tang In unconsciously fell into a daze. He was not a fool, and Lan Sha was not a man. There was no brotherhood between them at all, and this overly grand revenge scene was undoubtedly beyond the scope of friendship. If Tang In was not sure about Lan Sha's attitude toward him before, he undoubtedly understood it now. After all, this was not something that could be done just because of a mere good impression. "Sir? Sir whom?" Tang In came back to his senses and realized that the person in charge of the branch was still standing in front of him, asking him a question. He shook his head and instantly suppressed the distracting thoughts in his mind. "Sorry, I was distracted. Were you just now? It's like this. Not long ago, a person named Alan suddenly came to the fraternal organization and said that he wanted to see you. His identity is the Yadong Business Group." "Alan? I got it." Tang In waved his hand to interrupt him. Of course, he knew who Alan was, but the latter's identity was sensitive. He had never thought that Alan would be related to the Grey Coat Army, so he did not publicize it in the secret agency. However, now that Alan had taken the initiative to look for him, after pondering for a while, Tang In shook his head and laughed. "Haha, you can't hold on anymore?" After thinking about it, Tang In made a decision and asked, "Where is he now? Still in the north?" "Yes, in Mountain Creek City." "All right, prepare a fast horse for me. I want it now. Also, where is the Grey Coat Army now? No matter where they are, after I leave, send someone to send a message to Leader Josiah. Tell her that I've been delayed by something and that I won't be able to return for a while. Tell her not to worry. Also, send a message to Lan Sha, the current Supreme Commander of the Grey Coat Army. Tell her that I'm fine. Remember, send the message separately. Find 2 people who are more alert, understand?" Understood. Mountain Creek City, the holy city in the north. Tang was no stranger to this place. He had personally toppled the statue of the goddess in the city once, so he was very familiar with it. However, it was also because of this familiarity that Tang Yin knew how far this city, which had not yet been occupied by the Grey Coat Army, was from where he was now. In this way, before Tang Yin could reach Mountain Creek City, the news of his safe return was naturally spread by the secret organization to the Grey Coat Army. Of course, the interval between the news was not long because the vanguard of the Grey Coat Army, who had gone berserk during this period of time, was already very close to the holy city in the north. In the evening, at the temporary camp. Are you sure you saw him with your own eyes? Yes, leader. Sir said that you don't have to worry. He'll be back when he's done. Phew, that's good. That's good. She let out a long sigh of relief, straightened her delicate body, and leaned back against the wooden back of the chair. At this moment, Josiah looked as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Her face was relaxed and relieved. Well, there was also a slight doubt. As mentioned before, Josiah was not a fool. Even though she did not know what had happened during the period when Tang Yin had disappeared, she was acutely aware that she seemed to have been deceived by Tang Yin and by Lan Sha. This made her feel terrible. It was not that she was blindly thinking that Tang Yin had done something despicable behind her back. She believed in Tang Yin. It was just pure resentment that her husband could tell Lan Sha, but not her. So, she had been beating around the bush for some time, wanting to know the truth from Lan Sha's mouth. But then, she saw Lan Sha, who had always been calm and composed, suddenly go on a killing spree as if he was venting something. Josiah suddenly felt a little scared and evasive. She did not dare to inquire about anything, afraid that she would find out that something had happened to Tang Yin from the other party. Even if her rational intuition kept telling her that the possibility of this was very, very high, but now the truth was out. Tang Yin was fine and would be back soon. Could it be that she was overthinking it? What Josiah, who was a little confused, did not know was that when she received the message, another member of the secret agency had also found Lan Sha's residence and delivered the same message. And the latter's reaction was surprisingly similar to hers. Even the contents of their first questions were similar. Everything is fine. The bloodshot, seemingly tired but unusually energetic eyes slowly lifted from the map on the table and looked at the member of the secret agency, who was a little bewildered not far away. He paused, as if he had just escaped from a place filled with gunpowder. His eyes were frighteningly bright. "You're not a messenger. What did you say just now?" He suddenly took a deep breath, waved his hand to steady himself, and then asked slowly, "Are you sure you saw your master Tang Yin with your own eyes?" "Yes." "Is he not injured?" "No." "Phew. Well, thank you. You may leave first." After the member of the secret agency who did not know what was going on left the room, Lan Sha also lay back on the wooden chair with relief. He raised his head and suddenly smiled at the dark ceiling. His smile was very relaxed. Josiah subconsciously avoided the truth because of her speculation. As such, one could imagine how much pressure Lan Sha, who knew all the inside information, was under during this period of time. Although she did not believe that something would happen to Tang Yin, she forced herself not to think of the worst. But how could she not think? Fortunately, the result she had been waiting for did not disappoint her. The candlelight flickered slightly. TSK, this kid's life is really tough. He managed to escape under such circumstances. Lan Sha was not the only one who breathed a sigh of relief. Bamitu, who had suddenly appeared, also breathed a sigh of relief. After coming back to his senses, Lan Sha looked at Bamitu with a faint smile. "Now you are willing to come out? If I remember correctly, this is the first time Grandpa Bamitu has taken the initiative to appear in front of me since he came back, right?" Cough cough. What are you talking about? I am not seizing the time to heal my injuries. To be honest, Bamitu was a little embarrassed since he came back. He was ashamed of not knowing where to put his face. It was not only because he could not explain to Lan Sha, but also because he had his own reasons. In the battle in the middle of the river, whether he admitted it or not, Bamitu had received help from Tang Yin. If it were not for Tang, Un's 1,000 years of pain, it was hard to say whether Bamatu could come back alive. From this point of view, Tang Un was his savior. But in the end, he came back by himself. But his savior was missing. No matter how he looked at it, this was not justifiable, wasn't it? Of course, since Tang Un had appeared safe and sound, these things would naturally not be mentioned. Lansha did not continue to tease him. After being happy for a while, he rubbed his eyebrows and once again focused on the strategic topographic map on the table in front of him. The feather pen in his right hand drew in the air, as if he was deducing and planning something. "Take a break, little girl." Bamata saw this and frowned slightly. "Before that kid came back, you were anxious to avenge him. I don't object and can understand. But now that he is safe and sound, let's put these troublesome things aside for now. Don't be so desperate. It's because he is safe and sound." He bent down, the feather pen fell, and drew a few arrowhead arcs on the map. Then, at the end of the circle that represented the town, there was a glaring cross. He got up, threw away the feather pen, and looked up. Lansha stretched and smiled brightly. "Don't you think such a happy event should be celebrated? Well, how about taking down 2 cities? Bamatu opened his mouth and looked at the smiling Lansha in a daze. He waved his hand numbly and disappeared in an instant. Damn it! What was there to say to such a war maniac? The next morning, Mountain Creek City. In a luxurious room on the top floor of a luxurious hotel in the center of the city. "Sir, we meet again. Alan, you seem to have put on weight. Looks like you're living a good life." "Ha!" As soon as the door opened, Ting En, who had come from afar, came face to face with Alan, who had been waiting there for many days. Tang En smiled and hugged him. "You're engaged, aren't you, Alan? I'm not talking about you, but people who are already engaged should stop running around." Alan smiled bitterly and replied, "Sir, you know that I can't refuse this time." "Of course I know." Letting go of Alan, Tang En's face instantly turned cold. He glanced at the lazy playboy standing at the side. "I don't need to guess. I know it must be your idea. Hey, don't blame me for not reminding you on account of our past friendship. I remember your grandfather's death. I can't beat your grandfather, but beating you up is not a problem." As Tang En expected, the only person who could come with Alan at this time was naturally Philip, the playboy. However, ever since Tang En walked in from the door, Philip had been sizing him up with a complicated expression. He no longer had his usual immoral image. At this time, he nodded and looked at Tang En seriously. "Let me make it clear first. No hitting in the face." As soon as he finished speaking, with a whoosh, he suddenly threw a punch and gritted his teeth. "Damn it, you're really not dead. What the F asterisk CK?" Tang En was shocked. He subconsciously raised his hand to block the heavy punch that was aimed at his face. Immediately, punches and kicks came like a storm. Philip's handsome face, which was close to him, was somewhat ferocious. "Why are you still not dead? Go to hell. You're serious? Are you crazy? Are you crazy? I am crazy. You're not dead, but my grandfather is dying." "Tell me, am I crazy? Tell me, am I crazy?" "No, crazy." Chapter 1047. It was not easy to be a fence-sitter or a middleman. It was possible to be on good terms with both sides without offending them, but it was also possible to be stuck in the middle and be in an awkward dilemma. For example, Philip had a good relationship with Tang En. Although they did not have a life-and-death friendship, it seemed like they were more like fair-weather friends. However, even if fair-weather friends developed to a certain extent, the friendship between them would not change. Whether it was the first negotiation with the Grey Coat Army or the problem with Alan, he and Tang En owed each other something and gave each other something. It was far more cold-blooded than fair-weather friends, and their cooperative relationship was very good. However, now that Tang En brought people to block his grandfather also wanted to wipe out Tang En, Josiah, and the others. It could be said that both sides were not good people. In the end, after the battle, Tang En almost died, and his grandfather was on the verge of death. How could Philip, who was sandwiched between friendship and family, feel at ease? After thinking about it, He could only fight with Tang Un with his fists. Of course, he could not win, but the result was not important. What was important was the process and the meaning of the process. Philip, had tried his best and had also taken revenge. He had done everything he could to get back some face for his grandfather. This way, he could be considered to have given himself a satisfactory explanation. Alan was very clear about this. So when he saw Philip and Tang In rolling around on the ground like gangsters fighting, he did not panic and stop them. Instead, he calmly closed the door, moved the tables and chairs around, and poured 2 cups of tea. Finally, he took out a medicine box from the inner room. After Alan finished all of this unhurriedly, this battle, which was more meaningful than the scene, came to an end. Huff! Huff! F*CKU. We agreed. Hiss. We agreed not to hit the face. Haha. So you still remember. Why did that person's first punch go straight for my face? Compared to Philip, who was lying on the floor and gasping for breath, Tang Un's image was much better. He tidied his messy clothes, sat back at the table, and drank a mouthful of tea. Then, the corners of his mouth twitched. He was not in a good mood. How embarrassing. I actually got hit by this guy. Tang Un's strength was undoubtedly several times stronger than Philip's. Even if both of them did not use their Do Chi or Blood Chi, Tang Un would still be able to throw Philip off with just their fists and kicks. It was just that this guy was too sneaky, hugging and wrestling as soon as he came up. Tang Un was caught off guard. In addition, he was greatly shocked by the news that Wu Ding was on the verge of death. While he was in a daze, this guy actually managed to sneak a few punches on him. Crack! You! How dare you! Hiss! I mean, you can't hit my face. His words were intermittent, but Tang Un naturally understood what he meant. He curled his lips and said, How refreshing. Your grandfather's strength is much higher than mine, but I didn't see him show any mercy. Damn it. He almost slashed me into the sea. Let's not talk about it anymore. Gently, gently, it hurts. Seeing that Tang Un did not need to be taken care of, Alan naturally went to help Philip up. He rubbed the latter's panda eyes with the external injury medicine, and a series of screams immediately rang out in the room. I'm not applying it anymore. I'm not applying it anymore. Fortunately, I was prepared. As he spoke, Philip took out a scroll from his bosom. He did not even look at it, and directly crushed it. In an instant, a holy and gentle light filled the room, enveloping Philip's body. A light healing scroll, and a high-grade one at that. Tang Un's eyesight was brilliant, and he instantly recognized this item. The corner of his eyes could not help but twitch. He knew that this guy was indeed prepared. He was just waiting for him to come and fight, and then heal his external injuries. He was not at a disadvantage at all. In comparison, Tang Un rubbed the corner of his mouth, feeling even more depressed. He said unhappily, Tell me, why are you looking for me? I'm not busy. Let me ask you a question first. Gulp. The panda eyes turned pale. Philip drank a mouthful of tea, spat out the tea foam, and put down the teacup heavily. Then, he leaned forward and glared fiercely at Tang Un, as if he was looking at a great enemy who had stolen his wife. The mysterious barbarian commander of the Northern Wilderness tribes is now with your gray coat army, right? Yes, I brought her over. At this point, there was no need to hide Lan Shah's existence, and it could not be hidden. Tang Un simply nodded and admitted it, laughing heartily. Haha, are you shocked? As far as I know, your Blank's army has suffered a lot in her hands recently. He waved his hand forcefully and interrupted. Who the hell asked you this? I heard that the mysterious barbarian commander is a woman, very young, and very beautiful, has a great figure. You mother****. Tang Un's stunned expression undoubtedly gave Philip the answer. His handsome face was instantly distorted with grief, anger, regret, and other complicated expressions. He reached out his hands and grabbed Tang Un's neck, roaring furiously. I'm going to F***ing kill you. Tang Un, you destroyed my fame in one battle, destroyed my 1,000 years of glory. Mother****. What kind of nonsense is this? Not being able to catch Tang Un, Philip slammed the table with a deafening sound, wailing tearfully, I was too late. I was too *king late again. If I met Josiah first, there would be no gray coat army, no Brand's current predicament, and I would be the Empire's hero. If I knew that the mysterious barbarian commander was such a strange woman, I would end the 1,000 years of war between the Bran and the northern wilderness, and the legend of peacefully unifying the continent. My glorious name will definitely be left in the annals of history. Silence. With their mouths half open, Tangan was dumbfounded, and so was Alan. At this moment, they only felt that what Philip the Imperial Cityflower Wolf said was very reasonable, and they were actually speechless. Powerful logic. Although this seemed more like a farce, if Tang-in did not travel to this other world, with Philip's title as the Imperial Cityflower Wolf and his countless methods of picking up girls, he would definitely be able to do it. It had to be said that these fantasies, seemed to have a slight possibility of success. At that time, Philip would really become the first person in history, and he would even be more awesome than his grandfather, the sword god Wuding. He could even make the world peaceful by picking up girls. Such a valiant existence. What kind of legend would he be? Well, the above was just a fantasy. Now that Tang-in was here, Josiah was his wife, and Lonsha had hidden feelings for him, there was no point in saying these things. However, the one who immediately stopped Philip's farce was not Tang-in. Although after the latter came back to his senses, he was eager to teach Philip a lesson, and then beat his handsome face into a pig's head. But at this moment, there was a series of knocks on the door. Seeing that after Alan opened the door, 7 or 8 old men in luxurious clothes walked in one after another, Tang-in could not help but be stunned and asked in surprise. After the former came in, he saw Philip sitting on the wooden chair with a broken heart, drinking tea like he was drinking wine, one cup after another, with snot and tears flowing down his face. He was also stunned. "What's going on? I heard a lot of noise from next door. Let me introduce you." In an instant, Philip put away his expression, weakly spread out his hands, looked at Tang-in, and said, "I'm just a guide. This time, it's not me who's looking for you. It's these congressmen who are looking for you. Old knights, don't you want to talk to the Gray Coat Army? Then talk to him first. We can talk about anything after he's settled. His name is Tang-in, and he's the man of the Gray Coat Army's leader, Josiah." What a pair of adulterous couple. Of course, the last sentence, which was full of self-abandonment and resentment, was said in his heart. Otherwise, Tang-in would beat him to death. "Hello, Your Excellency Tang-in. We are." After listening to Philip's introduction and confirming that Tang-in could make the decision, these old men in luxurious clothes suddenly perked up. They had been waiting here for a long time. If it were not for the Brand's precarious situation, a luxurious negotiation team, formed by their status, would not be waiting here for a rebel mob. However, before the first old man finished speaking, Tang indirectly waved his hand and interrupted. "It doesn't matter who you are." He turned to look at Philip and said indifferently, "You don't mind if I throw them out now, do you? What a joke. You want to negotiate, and we'll negotiate. Don't you know who has the initiative now? Anyone can start a war, but if they want to stop it, and when to stop it, it's up to the winner of the war." Impudent. Junior, even if you're from the poor and have not seen the world, you should still have manners. How dare you? You, what do you want to do? I'm warning you up. Bang, bang, bang. Bang. He stood up, raised his leg, and kicked randomly. Shadows flew everywhere, and a series of banging sounds could be heard in the corridor outside the door. In an instant, a human tower was built. Then, the door closed with a bang. The sound insulation was good, and the screams and groans were reduced and disappeared in an instant. Done. Clapping his hands, as if brushing away insignificant dust, Tang-in sat back at the table and looked at the speechless Philip and Alan. He spread his hands innocently. "I already said to throw them out, but they don't understand human language. Don't you think it's strange? There's no need to do this, right?" After a pause, Philip smiled bitterly. "They are all members of the Second Prince's faction, and they are very sincere. Otherwise, I wouldn't have accepted this task." Tang-in, of course, didn't care about the members, and he didn't care about the struggle for imperial power. He just looked at Philip and asked, Do you know what they want to talk about? I probably know. Tang and spread his hands. Then it's fine. Why did so many people come to scare me? Philip was speechless. After a while, he looked at Tang Un and shook his head. Sure enough, I can't hide it from you. In, how did you know that I can make the decision for this negotiation? You're overthinking. Tang Un shook his finger, narrowed his eyes, and smiled. It's very simple. As long as the sword god is not dead, how can these weaklings order you to lead the way? Besides, although you're unreliable, this so-called negotiation is at most to convey the intention. It's not that important. You're more than enough to make the decision. Why do you need these old guys to make a scene? After a pause, he leaned back on the wooden chair. Tell me, how does Elder want to play this time? Tisk, with this brain of yours, Winston shouldn't have believed that you would die so easily. Philip smacked his lips and sighed with emotion. He straightened his body slightly. All right, since you've seen through it, then let's talk openly. Right, this time it's really not my grandfather's idea. He's really dying now. Don't misunderstand. I don't blame you. At least I don't hate you. To be honest, my grandfather's body has been deteriorating over the years, and he's getting older and older. Especially after returning from the north last year. He's afraid of the cold, and he's almost at the end of his life. Turning the teacup in his hand, Philip said slowly, to be able to have a good fight with his lifelong rival, the strongest person in the northern wilderness, Bamatu. Even if he doesn't win, his heart will be comforted and happy. I can see this, so, Tang In, my grandfather doesn't blame you. Startled, he nodded lightly. At this time, Tang In finally understood why Wu Ding, who was on the river's surface, wanted to fight them to the death even if he had to die together with them. It wasn't because he made a mistake in his calculations, nor was it because Wu Ding didn't care about the safety of the Bran Empire. It was because he really didn't have much time left. On the side, Alan was also stunned when he heard this. Wu Ding's significance to the Bran Empire might not be deeply felt by an outsider like Tang In, but it was different for them, who were born and raised in the Bran. Wu Ding wasn't just a sword god. He wasn't even the so-called strongest person in the continent. It was only because of his identity as the guardian of the Bran. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if Wu Ding fell, half of the Bran sky would collapse. And with the current situation, the end of the world could be seen. All right, let's not talk about this. If you have time, take some time to visit my grandfather. I can see that he has something to say to you. Philip shook his head, as if he was using this as an excuse to get rid of the distracting thoughts in his mind. He said seriously, this time, I came here mainly because of the Imperial Court. They want to quell the chaos in the country as soon as possible. So, they proposed a plan, which is to set aside an area in the north for the Grey Coat Army. In this area, the Grey Coat Army can do whatever they want. Nominally, this area is managed on behalf of the Bran Empire, which is equivalent to a subsidiary fief. Both sides can sign an agreement that they won't attack each other for 10 years or even hundreds of years. Hearing this, Alan was completely dumbfounded. Subsidiary fief, able to do whatever they want. What kind of concept was this? Wasn't this just a small country within a country? The Grey Coat Army actually succeeded. They really fought until the Bran Empire admitted defeat and even gave up their territory. Tang In wasn't agitated. On the contrary, he casually picked up his teacup. Sounds good. Well, why don't you tell me how big that area is first? After a pause, Philip blinked. 5 cities? Huh. Tang In laughed. His laughter was mocking. He didn't comment on the area, but raised his finger and pointed outside the door. They should be glad that they didn't negotiate with me. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as simple as being kicked out of the door. I would kick them into their graves in advance. Don't be agitated. It's a negotiation. Ha. There are things to negotiate. There are things to negotiate. Philip laughed awkwardly. Then tell me, how big of a territory do you want? Not much. Just a piece of land is enough. Tang In raised his index finger and smiled like a fox. For example, that place called the Bran. Ha! Philip laughed too, but his laughter was ridiculous. I would like to agree, but the key is, can the Grey Coat Army take it down? Don't be agitated. It's a negotiation. There are things to negotiate. there are things to negotiate. Tang In pretended to pat Philip on the shoulder, returning the words back to him, and then laughed. How about this? We have a good relationship, so I'll give you face. How about we cut all ties and give the North to us? Philip couldn't pretend anymore. He supported himself on the table and gritted his teeth. You're F asterisk king kidding me. Wrong. You're the one who F asterisk king kidding me first. Chapter 1048. You're F asterisk king kidding me. Wrong. You're the one who F asterisk king kidding me first. One side glared angrily, while the other side was calm and collected. After staring at each other for a while, Philip sat back in his chair and waved his hand angrily. I'm not kidding. I didn't come all the way here to entertain you. Show me some sincerity. Compared to sincerity, I prefer to speak with facts. Tang In pointed at his feet. Do you believe that the place we're standing right now, the holy city in the north, will become the territory of the Gray Coat Army in less than a week? Well, do you know how many towns there are under the Gray Coat Army's rule? I haven't counted them, but there should be more than 100. You're offering a mere 5 towns in exchange for such an achievement. And you're still not kidding me? I said we can talk about it, but you can forget about the north. Philip shook his head firmly. You really dare to ask for it? The entire Bran Empire is divided into 2 areas, the south and the north. The south's territory is small, and it's not even half of the north's vast wilderness. If we give all of this to you, then who will be whose territory? Moreover, the south may be prosperous now, but that's because it has the north as a source of materials and a huge warehouse of finished products. In fact, the south's climate is better than the north's. It's more suitable for living, and the land is more fertile. In other aspects, such as mineral resources, human resources, and so on, the south is inferior. If we really lose the north, there won't be any raw materials, and there won't be any goods. Even if there are goods, there won't be a market to sell them. In time, there won't be any need for you or the barbarians to attack. The remote empire will be played to death by itself. Philip took a deep breath. His gaze was as sharp as an eagle's as he fixed his gaze on Tang In. Tell me, under such circumstances, will we give up the north? Tang In shrugged casually as if he didn't feel the pressure exerted by the other side. You're very thorough. Well, is it because you've considered such an outcome? Philip paused for a moment, then looked away. That's not important. Tell me what you want. As you know, it is impossible for the Gray Coat Army to conquer the Bran Empire by itself. Why don't you take advantage of this opportunity to get as many benefits as possible from the negotiation table? That is what you should be thinking about now. If you miss this opportunity, don't blame me for not warning you. Once the Bran's royal court is driven mad and disregards everything, they will mobilize the 3 main forces at the front line to attack us. Even if the barbarian army invades and occupies half of the north, your Gray Coat Army will still be finished. Philip, who was in a different position, tried his best to persuade him, tried his best to put himself in his shoes, and tried his best to persuade him. However, with a chuckle, Tang In looked mockingly at the sincere Philip, shook his head, and laughed. You really came prepared. Are you bullying me because I don't know anything about military affairs? Philip raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking innocent. Pretentious. Keep pretending. Tang In looked at him with disdain. I don't know how to command a battle, but I can still understand the map, and my brain is not muddled. Let's not talk about whether the Bran dares to mobilize the main forces at the front line. I guess you don't dare, or you're struggling in pain. After all, the barbarians are much more ferocious than the Gray Coat Army. Look at the Gray Coat Army's current momentum. After fighting their way out of the 100,000 mountains in the west, their vertical expansion is extremely rapid, although they can't reach the eastern coastline in a short time, as long as the main official road to the front line is completely cut off. After a pause, Tang In picked up his teacup and took a sip. He smiled brightly and said, Then, it won't be a question of whether your 3 main forces will return or not. It will be a question of whether they will become turtles in a jar if their escape route is cut off. Am I right? Ahem. Philip coughed twice. Under Alan's strange gaze, he said calmly, "I have already conveyed the conditions of the negotiation. You can discuss among yourselves. I don't have anything to do with this. Let's go out for a drink. There's a tavern next door with a good atmosphere. Get out." He raised his middle finger. The first negotiation came to an end just like that. In other words, this was not a formal negotiation at all. Just like what Tang Yin said, this was only the initial intention conveyed by the brand. The general idea was that you are ruthless and we admit defeat. Look, we will give you some territory to play with, and then we will live in peace. There was not much sincerity. Perhaps even if the Gray Coat Army really agreed to this condition, the Brand's palace would regret it. Even if they agreed to it, they would be unwilling and unwilling. There was nothing that they could not figure out. One's position determined one's brain. The Brand's palace had been sitting on the throne of the king of the continent for thousands of years. They had long been used to the sense of superiority. Even if the situation was precarious, it was impossible for them to have the thought of giving in such a short period of time. Originally, the Brand's empire had stood on the continent for thousands of years. It had weathered the wind and rain, and there had never been any signs of collapse. Could it be that it suddenly couldn't hold on this time? It didn't make sense thinking about it. It was only when the soldiers were at the city gates, the swords on their necks, and the old king, who was rumored to be on the verge of death, was forced out of the palace castle that they would suddenly realize, oh, so the world had really changed from this point of view. It could even be said that the initial intention conveyed this time was not reliable. The main purpose was to test how big the appetite of the Gray Coat Army was. If it was small enough to be accepted, then they would really talk. But for someone like Tang Yin, who was asking for the Bulan Empire or the entire Northern Territory, Philip reckoned that when he passed the message back, the nobles and counselors in the capital would laugh at him for being greedy and insatiable, forgetting his own name after winning a few battles. It was meaningless and meaningless. Of course, it would be an exaggeration to say that it was completely useless. After all, whether it was Philip or the 7 or 8 counselors, they were all honorable people. It was impossible for them to wander around the dangerous north for no reason. Combined with what Philip said before, these people were all in the second prince's faction. Tang Yin could roughly guess the other party's intention this time. They probably wanted to lay the groundwork and leave a good foreshadowing. Once the situation in the Brand really turned around, they could use this contact to get in touch with the Gray Coat Army before the first prince's faction and negotiate. To put it bluntly, it was still the same as the imperial power struggle. Perhaps, from this, one could see the current attitude of the Brand's palace. They still did not realize the impending danger and were still stuck in their usual mindset, running their dirty business. It was hopeless. Of course, not everyone was like this. For example, Philip, who was known as a womanizer, gave people the impression that he was unrestrained and indulged in women. No one would be surprised if he died in the belly of a woman one day. This time, however, he was extremely sensitive and could smell a fatal danger from the current crisis. His attitude was cordial, and he changed his usual style. For the rest of the day, when he was exchanging drinks with Twain, he would occasionally beat around the bush and express his thoughts directly or indirectly. It seemed that he had great expectations for this negotiation. However, it had to be said that Philip was desperate and had found the wrong person. Tang Yin was Josiah's husband, and to a certain extent, he could influence Lan Shah's will. However, the key was that he had never been in charge of anything. In the huge Gray Coat Army, other than Fry and a few other good friends, he had nothing to do with the other matters. He also did not want to be involved. The most he could do in this negotiation was to act as a go-between for Philip's sake and pass on a message. Forget about the rest. However, Philip seemed to be really anxious this time. He changed 3 drinking places in a row and still nagged endlessly. In the end, Tang Yin gave Alan a look, and the two of them worked together to drink this guy until the world finally quieted down. The next day, outside the city, it was time to leave. In fact, there was no need to leave in such a hurry. After all, they had been here for so long. A few more days would not make a difference. However, the congressman felt that it was not safe in Mountain Stream City. They were afraid that when they opened their eyes one day, they would find themselves kidnapped by a group of ragged mobs. Their lives would be in serious danger. Therefore, when they saw Tang in, they guessed that Philip had also passed on their message, so they packed up and left in a hurry early in the morning. As for Philip, he waited until the convoy left Mountain Stream City before he woke up slightly from his hangover. Then, he lifted the curtain of the carriage and stared blankly at the tall city wall in the distance. He did not recover for a long time. F***CK, who gave the order to leave, hearing the angry roar from the convoy not far away. Tang In shook his head and looked away. He continued to explain to Alan, who was in front of him. Where were we? Oh, the engagement. That Annika is not bad. Whether it is her qualifications or her background, you kid, you've gained a lot. You can put aside the business of the business group and spend more time with her. Don't run around in the future. It's just an engagement. Be careful not to lose everything. Ha! Don't worry about Philip. I'll tell him not to disturb you guys in the future. Of course, if you have the ability to bring Annika to the north, that would be great. You guys should discuss this among yourselves. Don't make it difficult. From the beginning to the end, whether it was the poor boy who sold newspapers in the slums or the leader of a new business group that was as rich as a country, Alan's respect for Tang Un had never changed. Therefore, Tang Un was also very concerned about Alan's matters. If possible, Tang Un really did not want to implicate the latter. But just like how the latter respected him, Alan's attitude had always been stubborn when it came to helping Tang Un. Then he could only continue to remind him and prepare a few more backup plans for him. The convoy seemed to be arguing. Alan's identity could not be exposed, so Tang Un did not say anything more. In the end, he hugged Alan, got off the carriage, and walked toward the luxurious convoy. Before he got close, Philip's frantic yelling could be heard clearly. Bullsh**T. Who the hell allowed you to leave without permission? Do you have the right? Can you bear the responsibility? And you're glaring at me. Not convinced. A bunch of idiots. Philip, who was waving his hands and roaring, did not look like an imperial flower wolf, but more like an enraged lion. His aura was fully released, and his spittle flew everywhere. It was as if he was going to eat someone up. In fact, Philip really did have the intention of eating these old men in front of him alive. He almost vomited blood yesterday because of drinking. Why? Wasn't it because he wanted to be entangled with Tang Un so that he could go back and talk to him in bed so that this negotiation could be facilitated? In the end, they had just started talking, and he had to leave as soon as he woke up. Moreover, he had to be carried away in his sleep. What a pig teammate. He turned his head angrily and suddenly saw Tang Un not far away, who had his arms crossed and was chuckling. Philip could not help but be stunned. He then exhaled and walked over with a bitter smile. You didn't handle this properly. He shrugged and spread his hands. Ha, their legs are on other people's bodies. What can I do if they want to leave or stay? Tang Un patted the dejected Philip's shoulder and laughed. All right, don't pretend to be pitiful to gain sympathy. I will convey your intentions to Josiah and the upper echelons of the Gray Coat Army. As for what they think and do, don't pester me. It's useless even if you pester me. My presence in the Gray Coat Army is very low. I can't help you. Pause for a while. He handed over a small piece of paper. This is the address of a secret organization's contact point in the South. If you have anything, you can contact me through there. This is the last time. I don't want to see Alan involved again. Otherwise, don't blame me for falling out with you. After he finished speaking, he opened his arms and hugged the speechless Philip. He then turned around, waved his hand, and simply left. Behind him, Philip stood there in a daze for a long time, watching Tang Un's figure until it disappeared. When he came back to his senses, he squeezed the piece of paper in his hand and sighed to the sky. He had never felt so clearly that the Empire was really finished. Turning around, he walked past the group of old men with ashen faces in a daze and walked straight to the carriage. When he had one foot in the carriage, paused for a while, turned to look at the Parliament members who were still furious, and gritted his teeth in anger. A group of fools who are old and ignorant. Remember, the Empire's destruction will be in your hands. After he finished speaking, He slammed the door of the carriage with a bang. The old men in luxurious clothes looked at each other and were even more furious. Damn it! What is this? Even his father wouldn't dare to speak to us like this. Ignorant of etiquette. Such a noble family, but such an ungrateful son of a bitch. Oomph. Let's see how long he can be arrogant for. A guy who only knows how to roll around a woman's stomach is worthy of discussing national affairs with us? How dare he lecture us? TSK. Chapter 1049. No matter which world it was, no matter which era it was, there were plenty of ignorant idiots who did not know how to write the word regret until they were badly battered. Perhaps they were incapable of accomplishing anything, but their ability to screw things up was absolutely trustworthy. Therefore, Philip left very unwillingly and angrily. But now that things had come to this, he, who knew that he had lost his chance, could only leave with these idiotic teammates and make plans in the future. Of course, it was impossible for him to deal with those idiotic teammates in a fit of anger. The latter undoubtedly thought the same. Philip's image as the imperial capital's flower wolf was too deeply rooted in people's hearts. It was rare for him to be serious, so no one thought highly of him. They thought that he was acting up again. Even if they could not afford to offend him, they could still avoid him. Therefore, they did not speak on the way back, Tang, and did not stay in Mountain Stream City for long. In fact, there was nothing to stay for. Knowing that the murderous Gray Coat army was about to attack, the northern holy city was no longer as prosperous as it used to be. Although it was not empty, most of the shops that did business were closed. Those with connections, such as the nobles, packed up and left long ago. Those without connections, such as the commoners, closed and locked their doors in broad daylight, kowtowing and praying to the statues of their gods at home. Everyone was in a state of panic. In such a large commercial street, there were not many kittens wandering around at the end of the street. Tang in with a man of his word. After spending most of the day passing through countless blockades and returning to the Gray Coat army, he immediately found Josiah, Lan Shah, and the others who had gathered together to sharpen their swords. He conveyed Philip's message. Then, the impromptu meeting to boost morale before the battle was dismissed. The leading officers returned to their respective armies to prepare for battle. Josiah, Fry, Lan Shah, and a few high-ranking members of the Gray Coat army who happened to be there once again formed a small round-table meeting based on the news brought back by Tang In. Among them, Lan Shah had never been involved in matters other than commanding the battle. Although this matter was related to the future of Bran and the Gray Coat army, and, to a certain extent, it also involved the interests of the northern wilderness tribes, she did not say anything and was about to leave. However, Josiah called out to her and very magnanimously asked her to stay for a discussion. Lan Shah thought about it and didn't refuse. "I don't agree to negotiate." Before Tang In pondered whether or not he should put in a few good words for Philip, hoping that the other party would not be scolded badly, a white-haired senior suddenly stood up and said excitedly, "The Brand's court cannot be trusted. Think about what happened last time. We cannot make the same mistake again." He had experienced the destruction of the City of Dawn and was wary of negotiating with the Brand's royal palace. Naturally, he shook his head and rejected the idea without hesitation. Immediately after, the remaining elders in the upper echelon also seconded the proposal. "I don't agree either. Those despicable people are not worthy of our trust. Talk my ass. Let's charge over and drag that muddle-headed king out of the royal castle. Then we'll have a good talk with him." "That's right. There's nothing more to say. Continue to beat his mother." Without the presence of the generals, officers, and other subordinates, these senior elders, who were born in the wilderness, did not care about the demeanor of a superior. Instead, they used their local accent and slang and directly cursed. Tang In grinned when he heard this. Fortunately, he was careful and did not mention the 5 cities that Philip had mentioned in exchange. Otherwise, this meeting would have collapsed before it even started. Of course, the current situation was not much better. Just as Tang In had said before, the Gray Coat army was in a good situation now. News of victory kept coming in. The total territory that they occupied was about one-fifth of the size of the Northern Territory. Moreover, this area was constantly expanding as the army swept through thousands of miles like a tiger. Therefore, why would the people present consider negotiating with the brand and do something stupid like losing a watermelon for a sesame seed? Even Josiah and Fry shook their heads lightly. It was obvious that they did not think much of it. The reason why they did not ridicule with the other senior officials was because they did not want to speak up for the sake of their acquaintance, Philip. Seeing that Tang Yin, the middleman, was a little embarrassed, Josiah suddenly turned to look at Lan Shah, who had been silent, and asked, "Miss Lan Shah, what do you think?" "Me? Haha. I never care about these things." Lan Shah inadvertently glanced at Tang Yin, chuckled, and shook her head. "It's okay. There's no harm in saying it." "Yes, Deputy General Lan Shah. You're not an outsider. Tell us your opinion. We're all uncouth people. We don't know much." "Deputy General Lan Shah, you're wise and your words are reasonable. Tell us." Except for Tang Yin, Josiah, and Fry, the rest of the senior officials did not know the true identity of Lan Shah. However, they respected Lan Shah's ability, so they sincerely advised him. "Okay, then I'll say something." Lan Shah could not refuse such kindness. He was not pretentious. He pondered for a moment and said, "Everyone knows that I've always been in charge of commanding the war. I don't understand internal affairs, so I'll talk about the current situation from the perspective of military strategy. Well, there are a total of 8 roads in Brand's northern hinterland that lead directly to the front line, including the wide official roads and military roads. We've taken 5 of them, which is more than half. The remaining 3 are in front of our army. If there are no accidents, we can take them all in less than half a month." Lan Shah did not talk about the negotiations. Instead, he talked about the glorious battle situation of the Greycoat army. Naturally, this caused the group of elders in the upper echelons to be shrouded in fog and confusion when they heard this. However, Josiah and Fry, who knew a lot about military affairs, frowned slightly. They seemed to have thought of something and looked thoughtful. "As expected," Lan Shah said again, "everyone should not forget that the Brand's main army has not officially fought with us. They're stationed in the frontline cities and are in a stalemate with hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors. Well, Northern Wilderness soldiers. Once we take over all the official roads, the Brand's main army will be in a desperate situation where they're attacked from both sides." I see. Isn't that great? Let's eat them up." Lan Shah's few words instantly excited the senior officials who did not know much about war. They waved their hands boldly. "Let's get rid of the main army. Let's see what else the Brand has to fight with us." "It's not that simple." Lan Shah calmly poured cold water on them. "The reality is that once the Brand's main army abandons the frontline battlefield and fights in the hinterland, we have no chance of winning with our current strength." They dare to abandon the front line? Those are the cannibalistic barbarians. There are thousands of people behind. Cough, cough. Hearing this, Tang Yin suddenly coughed violently and interrupted. He smiled bitterly at the senior officials who looked at him with confusion. "Cannibalism? Barbarians? Aren't you scolding bald donkeys in front of Monk?" Glancing at Twain, Lan Shah snorted but did not pursue the matter further. She said expressionlessly, "You know Brand style better than I do. Compared to having his retreat cut off and having his main force of nearly 1 million trapped in a region, do you think they care about the lives of those ordinary people? So, we can't occupy these official roads." He shook his head. "The location of the official roads is an important place that must be fought for on the battlefield. If we don't occupy it, what we're doing now will be in vain." He paused and looked at Tang Yin. "The key is that before we completely occupy it, the Brand's main army will definitely come back to rescue us. I think this is the reason why the Brand suddenly sent people to negotiate. This is also their bargaining chip." Tang Yin nodded silently and sighed inwardly. What else could he say? He had only reacted after hearing what Philip had said, but Lan Shah had only heard that Brand had come to negotiate. She was able to see the whole picture from one small clue and see the whole story from the beginning. This was a F** king crushing of intelligence. This girl was definitely a demon. Her intelligence was close to that of a demon. Wait, my mind's a bit messed up. Let me think. Not everyone was as perverted as Lan Shah. The senior officials with gray hair knocked on his head and said hesitantly, "So, we must occupy these roads, but we can't occupy them. Once we occupy them, those brand bastards will fight us to the death, and we can't beat them?" Lan Shah nodded. "That's more or less what I mean. So, Vice Commander, you mean we should negotiate?" "No, at least not now." Lan Shah shook his head and tapped the table with his finger. "And if we can't win on the battlefield, the result will be the same no matter how we negotiate. With the current strength of the Gray Coat Army, we can't destroy the entire Bran Empire, but we must completely occupy the north. Otherwise, when the Bran recovers, the Gray Coat Army will definitely be attacked, and it's not impossible for them to be completely wiped out." After he finished speaking, Lan Shah picked up his teacup and didn't speak anymore. The room suddenly fell into a depressing silence. The senior officials were stunned. Their minds that were about to be carried away by the successive victories finally woke up completely. The long-lost sense of urgency and danger hit them again. "So, we've been walking on the edge of a knife all this time. With the slightest carelessness, this seemingly flourishing but actually fragile great future would instantly be shattered into pieces." In the silence, Josiah looked around at the people around her who were worried about their gains and losses. She pursed her lips slightly and cast a subtle look of gratitude at Lan Shah. She had to express her gratitude. There were some words that couldn't be said in her position. If she said it, the meaning would change, and hurting the morale would be the least of it. Sometimes, she had to wait for a lesson that she had long known, such as a defeat, before she could warn everyone. However, ever since Lan Shah took over the army, Josiah had waited for a long time, but she didn't get this opportunity. Now that Lan Shah took the initiative to say it, it was undoubtedly the best way to tell everyone about the fatal crisis hidden in this great situation. To put it bluntly, Lan Shah wasn't a member of the Gray Coat Army. He was just here to do some temporary work. Even if the truth was hurtful, it didn't matter as long as she didn't care. The senior officials didn't have any other opinions about Lan Shah's shocking speculation. Or rather, they didn't care about other opinions. Their minds were muddled, so they changed the topic and asked, since we have to occupy the north, then we have to occupy the remaining 3 main roads. What should we do when the main force of the Bran attacks from the front line? Lan Shah didn't give a clear answer. He narrowed his eyes and said slowly, "There are priorities, but things that should be solved must be solved. Maybe I have a way." Pause for a while. He smiled at Tang Yin and Josiah, who were looking at him in surprise. "Let's wait a little longer. Maybe there will be a turn for the better." Chapter 1050. It was like a dream. That was the current situation of the Gray Coat Army. It had to be admitted that the Gray Coat Army was able to achieve its current prosperity not only because of their own tireless struggle, but also because of external factors. If it weren't for the purple bore cannons left behind by Ze, the Gray Coat Army wouldn't have been able to conquer so many cities so easily. If it weren't for the northern wilderness tribes coincidentally attacking and holding back the Bran's main army, the Gray Coat Army wouldn't have been able to conquer the 100,000 mountains so smoothly. If it weren't for Lan Shah's whimsical decision to become the commander, the Gray Coat Army wouldn't have been able to invade the hinterland of the north in such a short time and become so successful. Of course, luck was also a kind of strength. Perhaps from this point of view, the emergence and growth of the Gray Coat Army was really a blessing from the heavens. However, the goddess of luck wouldn't always favor only one person. She would get tired of it. Therefore, hidden under the unprecedented prosperity of the Gray Coat Army was a cold blade that never disappeared. Once they made a wrong move, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. Therefore, Josiah and the others value the turning point that Lan Shah mentioned very much. However, Lan Shah was very tight-lipped. Perhaps he felt that it wasn't the right time yet, so he decided to keep them in suspense and didn't say anything. Everyone couldn't do anything about it. Thus, this small round table meeting ended in a hurry. Wait, was there something else that he didn't say? Philip's eagerly anticipated proposal for negotiation. TSK. How should he put it? Whether it was Josiah and the other higher-ups or Lon Shah, an outsider, they didn't feel that it was the right time for negotiation, so they just said a few words and completely ignored it. Seeing this, Tangen naturally couldn't say anything else. He originally felt that this proposal wasn't reliable, but he enthusiastically conveyed it for Philip's sake. Now that everyone was obviously not interested, the only thing he could do was silently mourn for Philip's sincerity. Is this worth it? The pre-war meeting had ended, and because of this small round table conference, it was now very close to the start of the war. However, during this period of time, Lon Shah, who was supposed to be commanding the troops, still took the time to find Bamitu. He handed him a thick stack of papers and issued a military order. However, the target of this military order was not the Gray Coat Army soldiers, but the hundreds of thousands of tribal soldiers stationed at the border. After all, Lon Shah was a member of the royal family, and he was very likely to be the next Northern Wilderness Empress. As such, even with Bamitu, the #1 expert in the Northern Wilderness, following him, he couldn't just run around as he pleased. Therefore, even though Lon Shah had left in a carefree manner and was now hiding in secret, in fact, not only did the tribal army know about her whereabouts, the Northern Wilderness Empress, who was thousands of miles away, also knew about it. Otherwise, if it was really a kidnapping, not to mention whether the barbarian army would explode, the Northern Wilderness Empress would definitely come over personally to take revenge. As for the person who passed on the message, of course, it was the spy Bamitu. There was no need for him to travel back and forth. There were long-term spies in the brand, and as long as he handed it over to them, he would be handing it over to the hundreds of thousands of barbarian army and the Northern Wilderness Empress. Regarding this point, whether it was Lon Shah who never asked about it, or Tang and who pretended not to know, they both knew. Now that Lon Shah took the initiative to find him, Bamitu couldn't help but frown as he looked at the military order that mobilized hundreds of thousands of barbarian army in one go. Is this worth it? To be more realistic, Bamitu and Lon Shah came over this time with the intention to gain something without risking anything. They didn't plan to sacrifice themselves. Of course, no matter how realistic it was for the Gray Coat Army, each of them was taking what they needed. Who asked them to not have a powerful marshal? If they suffered some losses, it was only right to share some of the spoils. However, a temporary job was still a temporary job. How could he put his entire fortune on the line to take the risk? If they really followed Lon Shah's military order, it wouldn't be as simple as mobilizing the army to scare the other party. They would have to fight with real swords and spears, and people would die, of course. He nodded straightforwardly. In the face of Bamitu's doubts, Lon Shah's attitude was very firm. But I don't see how this is worth it. Bamitu was very direct. According to you, the warriors of the tribe and the main forces of the brand are fighting to the death on the front lines. But the Gray Coat Army is taking advantage of the situation and expanding their territory without any worries. Is this worth it? Shaking his finger, Lon Shah had a sly look on his face. That's why I said that Grandpa Bamitu is the strongest in the Northern Wilderness, not a marshal. Your foresight is still a little too small. Of course, Lon Shah's words were just a good-natured joke, but Bamitu was stunned when he heard it. His foresight was too small. He had trained hard for decades, but in the end, he was still defeated by Wu Ding's sword in the battle on the river. Wasn't the reason because his foresight was too small? Lon Shah didn't notice Bamitu's momentary absent-mindedness and continued. The plan is like this. Next, I will lead the Gray Coat Army and continue to occupy the remaining 3 military routes, but the progress will be deliberately slowed down. Those hypocritical nobles of the brand's court won't know that danger is right in front of them until the reins are put around their necks. When there's only one route left, they will be nervous and even more conflicted, but they still won't make the decision to withdraw their troops to save us. This isn't for the sake of the thousands of brand citizens, but because they feel that there's still time, there's still room to turn things around, and they're not willing to give up such a large territory in the north to our tribe. He shook his head and laughed contemptuously. They will probably send people to continue negotiating with the Gray Coat Army. Haha, this is their usual practice. But the main forces of the brand at the front lines will be cut off, and their morale will definitely plummet, and their morale will be in chaos. At this time, hundreds of thousands of warriors from our tribe will launch a surprise attack, and will definitely win this battle. We'll succeed. Pause for a while. He restrained the murderous aura that belonged to the commander of an army. Looking at Bamitu, who was in a daze, Lansha shrugged casually. I've said it before, we're in a cooperative relationship with the Gray Coat Army. A win-win situation where we both achieve our strategic goals. This is the real way to cooperate. Taking one step forward and thinking 3 steps ahead, this was the mentality that a smart person should have. Even someone as strong as Bamitu couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle when he heard this. This wasn't the overbearing power of an individual powerhouse, but purely the strategy of a commander of an army who was proud and arrogant on the battlefield. He calmed himself down and asked, "Did you plan this from the beginning?" "I'm just going with the flow." Lansha unexpectedly smiled and shook his head. "Before this, I didn't expect the Gray Coat Army to have such combat potential, to be able to force the Bran Empire to such a state. But this is good too. A lion won't form an alliance with a goat. Since they have the temperament of a vicious wolf, it's reasonable to share some meat with them. Our tribe isn't a hypocritical brand. As long as we sincerely cooperate, we will never treat our partners unfairly. Our tribe also advocates the law of the jungle. We won't be so kind. Well, you spent so much effort to come up with such a perfect plan. Are you sure it's not for Tanyan?" Grandpa Bamitu, although Bamitu asked suddenly, with Lansha's intelligence, as long as his brain didn't suddenly go crazy or he didn't do it on purpose, such a simple word game would never succeed. After a moment of coquettishness, the general's demeanor from before instantly disappeared. He pinched a little of his white fingers and said proudly, "That's also the reason. But it's just a little, just a little. If I believe you, I'll have lived my life in vain." Bamitu shook his head disapprovingly, but didn't continue to pester him. "All right, girl, you've convinced me again. I'll explain this military order to you and pass it on." Then thank you, Grandpa Bamitu." The children of the northern wilderness were straightforward. Seeing that his goal was achieved, Lansha didn't dawdle anymore. He turned around and waved his hand. "All right, the battle is about to start. I'm going to command." "Wait." As if he suddenly remembered something, Bamitu hesitated for a moment, then suddenly called out, "Girl, there's something I forgot to tell you." Lansha paused and turned around. Not long ago, Tiu was ordered by the Empress to be taken back from the army. The Empress should already know about the matter of him secretly plotting against you. Pause for a while. Seeing the sudden change in Lansha's eyes, Bamitu calmly shook his head. "I didn't say that. You know the Empress better than I do. Her intelligence is no less than yours." "I'm sorry, Grandpa Bamitu. I shouldn't have doubted you." Lansha quickly bowed and apologized. Then she hurriedly said, "I'll write a letter to Mother right now." He waved his hand and interrupted her. "It's too late. Tiu should be in the Imperial City by now. And you know very well." Bamitu sighed softly. "If the Empress has made a decision, then no one can change it, including you." But brother," clenching her fists, Lansha's expression was abnormally anxious, but she couldn't even form a complete sentence with her half-open mouth, because she really did know her mother's way of doing things. Not only was the latter's intelligence no less than hers, her methods were much more ruthless than hers. She was a woman who was ruthless to others, but even more ruthless to herself. Go command the battle. These things aren't for you to care about. Besides, you can't care." Bamitu didn't completely guess it right. At this time, Tiu hadn't reached the Imperial City in the northern wilderness. Of course, he wasn't far from the Imperial City. However, This short distance was probably something he would never be able to cross. This was because a group of indifferent royal family elite troops, the Wilderness Wolf Cavalry, had suddenly charged out from the surroundings and surrounded the group he was in. Then, the Northern Wilderness Empress, dressed in simple clothes, appeared in front of him. Bamidou also guessed many things correctly. That was, the Empress, who had already made a decision, was indeed ruthless. In the temporary small tent, before the uneasy Tiu bowed and called out, "Mother," the Empress said coldly. The Empress said indifferently, "Ti Wu, you will die here." Then, she raised her hand and pointed to the west. The culprit is the Sava tribe more than 10 miles away. Their reason is that they don't want to see you, who has the blood of the brand, become the imperial highness of the northern wilderness. So, they led their troops to attack your troop. Although the Wilderness Wolf Cavalry outside the tent coincidentally passed by, it was already too late when they found out. They could only take your body back and slaughter the Sava tribe to avenge you. Pause for a while, looking at Tu, whose face instantly turned pale and was drenched in cold sweat. She was indifferent and emotionless. This is the right way to harm people. You can't even harm people, so you deserve to die. Chapter 10:51. He was given a chance, but he couldn't grasp it. This was undoubtedly a sad thing. Just like the old saying, if you don't take a gift from the heavens, you will be punished. Therefore Tiu died, and he died very tragically. When the corpse was transported to the imperial city, although it had been stitched up by professionals, it was still a mess of flesh and blood. It was too horrible to look at. What happened next was both unexpected and expected. The culprit, the Sava tribe, had long been dissatisfied with Tiu's identity as a bastard. They thought that the latter had tainted the noble bloodline of the northern wilderness royalty. Therefore, ambushed Tiu's group halfway. If it wasn't for the fact that a group of wilderness wolf riders happened to pass by, Tiu's corpse would have been hard to preserve. In the current situation where rumors were flying everywhere and Tiu's identity was doubtful, this reason was undoubtedly reasonable. No one doubted it, at least not on the surface. When the upper circle of the tribe heard this news, their first reaction was mostly to gloat. Because they thought that they knew more inside information, they also thought that Tiu deserved to die. Their second reaction was to mock and ridicule. They mocked the Sava tribe that had done what they wanted to do. This time, their flattery had hit the nail on the head. As expected, when the Empress heard the news, she was first grieved, then furious. The imperial city guards were sent out like a flood, once again wiping out the Sava tribe that had already been wiped out. Then, she waved her butcher's knife at the tribes that had been on good terms with the Sava tribe in the past. She didn't let any of them go, wantonly slaughtering them. For a moment, all the tribes within 100 miles were in a panic and uneasy. When the Empress was angry, corpses would float for 1,000 miles. Such an intense reaction was not expected by the upper echelons of the tribe. In front of a grieving mother who had lost her son, no one dared to go against the wind and persuade her. They all restrained their own children, afraid that at this sensitive time, they would touch the sensitive nerves of the seemingly crazy Empress. The imperial city was extremely peaceful for a moment. Because it was the time of the war, the grand funeral for Prince Tiu was delayed. The Empress, who had recovered from her grief, also ordered the news to be sealed off at the first moment. Once the war was over and Prince Lan Shah returned from the front lines, they would make arrangements for the funeral. There was nothing wrong with this move, but when it fell into the ears of the higher-ups of the tribe, they couldn't help but tremble with fear. Actually, after the incident, everyone was waiting to see how the Empress would react. Although Tiu was dead, his identity was still a problem. As such, how the Empress handled Tiu's funeral was undoubtedly a signal. If it was handled carelessly, it would mean that the rumors were true. Tiu, indeed, had the blood of the brand in him. This was also the result that everyone expected. Regarding Tiu's funeral, not only was everything strictly arranged according to his status as a prince, but it was also grand. He even went to great lengths to wait for Lan Shah to return from the battlefield. It was too formal and too grand. This move was undoubtedly to clear Tiyu's name. It was also the Empress's secret warning to everyone. Tiyu was her son, and this had never been false. If you have any doubts in the future, don't blame me for falling out with you. At this point, the recent events that had been brought up again and the rumors that had been spreading were once again forcefully suppressed. It was believed that for a long time in the future, no one would dare to mention it again. To a certain extent, Lan Shah's true identity was naturally even more secretive and smoothly buried in the river of time. This should also be the ultimate goal of all the Empress actions. When a woman was smart, even she herself would be afraid. All right, back to the main topic. Let's talk about how to seize the opportunity. As the only child born of the Northern Wilderness Empress and the military god Z, Lan Shah's ability to seize opportunities was much stronger than her brother, who came out of nowhere. The fish did not panic, and the water did not jump. He dug a deep hole for the Bran Empire and set up a fatal trap. Well, from this point of view, Philip, who was aware of the approaching danger in advance, was undoubtedly not weak in his ability to seize opportunities. In Mountain Stream City, if he had been allowed to grind for a while longer, it was very likely that he would have come into contact with Josiah, who could make decisions through Tangan. In that case, perhaps there would be a turning point for the situation. However, a group of useless teammates were really useless and forcefully kicked away the little chance that he had. And it was very regrettable that there were not many people who were as clear-headed and intelligent as Philip. Therefore, when the Bran Imperial Court received the news that the Grey Coat Army, who had been raiding everywhere as if they had been injected with chicken blood, had suddenly slowed down their attack momentum, their vigilance was immediately lowered. The vigilance that had just risen to his throat instantly fell back into his stomach. He only thought that the Grey Army had gone overboard and had now entered a painful adjustment period. Therefore, the discussion that had been discussed a lot in the Parliament chamber recently about whether to transfer the main forces back to the front line to kill the Grey Coat Army naturally took its course and did not rush to make a decision. Not to mention that they were short-sighted. That was an army of hundreds of thousands of barbarians. That was a country whose territory was measured in units of tens of thousands of miles. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, no one would think of giving up, nor would they dare to give up. Whoever made this decision, regardless of success or failure, would be the center of the empire for all eternity. Who had the courage to do so? It was hard to say for others, but at least those old aristocrats in the Parliament chamber did not have such courage. For example, the current situation of the Bran Imperial Court was like a frog squatting in a pot of warm water. They knew the danger, but they did not dare to break the situation. As they wavered, their thoughts decisively deviated, and they began to be greedy for the warmth of the soup that was gradually heating up around them. Therefore, half a month later, they watched helplessly as the Grey Coat Army slowly encroached on the main road again at a speed visible to the naked eye. What rose in their hearts was not a sense of urgency and danger, but thinking that there were still 2 more roads. There was no hurry. Another half a month passed, and when the second road was encroached on, well, according to the slow speed of the other party, it would take at least another half a month to occupy the last road. There was still time. There was no hurry. There was no hurry. They were not in a hurry, but the 3 main legions of the Bran, who were also paying attention to the situation at the rear, were anxious. One must know that there were nearly 1 million regular soldiers here. If there was no spacious road to retreat, they would not be able to leave. Once their retreat was cut off, they would be like turtles in a jar with no place to escape, and they would be at the mercy of the enemy. Unfortunately, it was useless for them to be anxious. Without the order of the military headquarters, they could not retreat on their own. Otherwise, they would be considered traitors. They could only be as anxious as ants in a hot pot, while the 3 main generals sent urgent messages back to ask for instructions. The reply from the capital of the Bran was always that they would wait and wait. It was not a perfunctory reply. The Bran had indeed made a breakthrough. The negotiation team that was sent to negotiate with the Grey Coat Army finally received a response from the other party that they could negotiate. It was just that the Grey Coat Army was too troublesome. The negotiation location was changed again and again, and the negotiation time was pushed back again and again. The brand could not say anything because the Gray Coat Army had a very good reason. That was, due to the bad record of the brand, the Gray Coat Army did not trust the brand, so they needed to be cautious. It was not that no one suspected that this was a delaying tactic by the Gray Coat Army, but the key point was that they could not find any evidence to support it. This was because after the Gray Coat Army agreed to the negotiation request, they stopped attacking the last road. No matter how one looked at it, they seemed to be very sincere. However, no matter if it was the frogs in the warm water of the brand's court, or the main army of the hot pot ants, none of them noticed that the tribal army that had been quiet for a few months had quietly opened their bloody mouth and revealed their sharp fangs. Finally, on an evening that couldn't be more normal, hundreds of thousands of barbarians tore off their disguises. Like a mudslide or an avalanche, they roared and roared furiously, madly charging towards the three main legions of Bulin and nearly 1 million regular soldiers. Both sides had been in a stalemate for a few months, so naturally, they had made ample preparations. It seemed that the tribal army had the upper hand, but the brand's army was not caught off guard. According to common sense, the following battle situation would be nothing more than a continuation of the previous stalemate where the barbarians had the upper hand and the brand's army was fighting and retreating. However, the actual situation was not like that. While they were resisting, they were also worried about the brand's army that had their escape route cut off. They had unknowingly violated a military taboo, and their combat power was sharply reduced. As soon as they came into contact with the tribal army, they did not even have the chance to resist. They were instantly pressed to the ground and beaten up. To be honest, this was not their fault at all. Even if they wanted to go all out, they had to do it when there was no way out. However, there was still a way out, and there was still a chance of survival. How could they not feel lucky? After all, who would want to die if they could live? Therefore, when the officers were commanding the battle, they were somewhat powerless, and they were also worried about whether there was still a way out and whether they could safely retreat and so on. Needless to say, the soldiers were even more worried. The current situation was obvious to everyone, and it was a fact that their combat power was not as good as the barbarians. Under such a premise, it was obvious which was more important: military merit, soldiers' pay, and their lives. Furthermore, no matter if it was an officer or a soldier, no one jumped out from the cracks of a rock, and everyone had parents, and so on. If they continued to fight, they would definitely die. Therefore, of course, they had to think more about the former. All these thoughts were like small snowballs rolling down from the top of a mountain, constantly accumulating and gradually growing bigger. There was no need to talk about the morale of the army. Even if there were a few generals and a few regiments of soldiers who were not afraid of death and were loyal to the glory of the empire. However, under such a situation, the effect that they could play was negligible. In just one night, the three main legions suffered heavy casualties and lost countless positions. Furthermore, it had to be said that this was the result of the Bran army's luck. Without Lan Shah's real-time command, the hundreds of thousands of Horde soldiers only lasted for a short while. Once Lan Shah's orders were given, they returned to their usual swarm, without using any techniques. Although this kind of strategy was still terrifying, it was much less efficient. They couldn't seize most of the opportunities to occupy the territory. Of course, although there was a slight flaw, the goal was achieved. In this night, other than the heavy casualties and the loss of countless lines of defense, the Bran army's legions suffered heavy casualties. The heavy losses that they could not accept were the soldiers who escaped or got separated during the night. And because of this, the rumors that spread quickly and couldn't be stopped were also spreading panic and rumors. No matter how strong the fortress was, it would not be able to resist the erosion from the inside out. Just like the Buran Empire, and just like the Buran Empire's main forces. This was the most fatal blow. It was also the precursor to collapse. Chapter 1052. The god of war, Zi, was killed. The god of swords, Wu Ding, was crippled, and the border was lost. The Bran was no longer the first empire that had stood on the mainland for thousands of years. The current Bran Empire was like a towering tree that had lost its vitality. Perhaps it still looked bright and lush on the outside, but the inside had long decayed. It had lost the function of metabolism and could not carry out photosynthesis to replenish itself. Now, with the heavy casualties of the three main legions at the front line, cracks began to appear on the bright exterior. This was a sign of collapse, and it could not be healed. The Bran Empire is finished. When the detailed battle report from the front line was sent back to the hinterland, it was already the third day after the war. In these 3 days, the main legions of the Bran Empire not only failed to reverse the decline, but they were like a giant ship that was soaked in water, sinking and collapsing even more, and their destruction was imminent. This was the most elite military force of the Bran Empire, not the preparatory chores that the Grey Coat Army was killing now. And with the continuous collapse of this elite force, in fact, it also drew away the pillar of the empire that was already on the verge of collapse. It was a shocking scene to see such a behemoth falling apart and falling into the abyss of depravity, and it could not stop at all. Even though Josiah was mentally prepared, standing in the enemy's position, he could not help but sigh and shake his head. Before joining the Grey Coat Army, the Bran Empire was Josiah's motherland, so it was normal for him to be emotional now. But Tang-In was different. It was not that he was not emotional, but he was mostly shocked. It was important to know that Tang-Un was a bad student, but he also went to university, and he also received 9 years of compulsory education. He also memorized a lot of history. If he remembered correctly, other than the great ancestor of the modern world, in the long river of history, there were many powerful people who raised the pole and rebelled. There were only a few successful cases. How could it be done here? This doesn't make any sense at all. Compared to Josiah's feelings and Tang-Un's shock, Lan Shah was much calmer. In fact, he even felt a little gloomy when he flipped through the detailed battle report. I was too careless. I should have written it in more detail. Recently, I've been so used to commanding the Grey Coat Army that I forgot that those idiots couldn't understand simple tactical requirements. What a pity. I let a lot of Bran's soldiers escape during the chaos. Sigh, idiots. Sighing again and again, Lan Shah was obviously very dissatisfied with the performance of the Central Army. She could only blame herself for not being able to switch over and treat the Tribal Army as the Grey Coat Army in terms of tactics. In fact, the two were completely different concepts. The former was obviously stronger than the latter in terms of raw combat power, but the latter's ability to comprehend superior battle tactics was far superior to the former. It could be said that the same tactical command in the hands of the Grey Coat Army and the Tribal Army would result in two completely different outcomes. In addition, there was also a reason that the Tribal Army had no commander. Lan Shah ran away, and Tiu was summoned back by the Queen and died on the way. Without a leader, it was natural that they couldn't do their best. But from this point of view, it could be seen that the only remaining route had a serious impact on the three main forces of the Bran. Facing the Tribal Army that was lacking in many things and almost didn't look like a regular army, they were actually beaten into such a sorry state. It was really embarrassing. After a moment of regret, Lan Shah became angrier and angrier as he looked at the battle report in his hand. He simply threw it away and got up the signal for I to walk out of the tent. Gather all the officers above the regimental level, organize the army, and send out the troops immediately. All right, have the purple cannons been transferred here? I have great use for them. Next, it's our turn to act. Leader. Before he finished speaking, Victor, who was Josiah's personal guard captain, walked in. He paused and said, "The Bran has sent someone over to negotiate again. He's just outside the camp. He's not very stable. It would be a miracle if he could be stable. If they could receive the battle report from the front line, the Bran could of course receive it as well, and even more detailed. In this way, the Bran could of course understand that the Grey Coat Army's purpose of delaying the negotiation time and changing the negotiation location was really to stall for time. They were waiting for the Tribal Army to make trouble, but no matter how angry they were, they still had to negotiate. Even the brand's attitude would only be lower. The reason was very simple. The last route was still in the vision of the Gray Coat Army. "I'm not free." Josiah waved his hand without thinking. "We'll talk after we occupy the last route." Also, after a pause, he smiled maliciously and said, "Tell them one thing. Sooner or later, you'll have to pay for what you did." Is that right, hubby?" Tangen touched his nose and nodded with a smile. That was indeed the truth. Thinking about the last time the Gray Coat Army negotiated with the brand, it was no wonder that Josiah and the others had dug a deep hole for the brand. It was still the same saying, sooner or later, you'll have to pay for what you did. The so-called difference was only a matter of time. At this point, as the tribal army suddenly tore off their disguise, the Gray Coat Army, who had previously slowed down their attack, rushed forward again. In a short span of 2 days, they had broken through several weak blockade lines and occupied the last important path. It was not the end, it was just the beginning. There was no celebration, no delay. Under Lan Shah's constant command, hundreds of thousands of Gray Coat Army quickly turned their spearhead from the previous vertical attack strategy to horizontal expansion, penetrating deeper into the south. The first important city to be conquered was the Holy City in the north, Mountain Creek City. This was almost a milestone strategic turning point. At this time, the brand's royal court finally woke up. Immediately, whether it was the soldiers under the four lords in the north, the preparatory servants, or the retired veterans, etc., they desperately gathered and almost piled up in front of the Gray Coat Army. They resisted step by step and retreated step by step. They did not hope to suppress the Gray Coat Army's spearhead. They only hoped to slightly slow down the Gray Coat Army's advance. The situation of the battle had developed to this point, and anyone could easily see that Brand North could not be saved. Now, the Brand's royal court only hoped that the process of defeat could be slowed down, so that they could receive the main forces that retreated from the front line as much as possible. That was also their last hope to turn the situation around. It had to be said that the decision made by the Brand's royal court, who suddenly woke up, was extremely correct. Now, the Brand's army that had been defeated repeatedly had completely lost the will to fight. If they did not retreat and regroup, it was not impossible for them to be completely wiped out in the north. But it was different if they chose to retreat, especially the main forces at the front line. After all, the regular army was a regular army. Other than sacrificing a part of their forces to stop the barbarians from chasing after them, most of the soldiers retreated quickly along the main roads. The Gray Coat Army would definitely not be able to stop them. Of course, the Gray Coat Army did not think of blocking them directly. Even a rabbit that was trying to survive in the face of death was terrifying, let alone the main forces that had been in the front line before. Lan Shah's countermeasure was extremely simple. Adhering to the principle of taking as much advantage as possible, he chose 2 main roads where the Brand's forces were the most concentrated and set up all the purple chamber cannons on both sides, without a doubt. This was definitely the most tragic breakout battle in the history of the Shi'ai's continent for thousands of years. As soon as the regular soldiers of Brand, who had been running day and night without sleeping or resting, stepped into the boundary, they did not even have time to catch their breaths. In their exhausted vision, meteors filled the sky and flashed away, landing directly under their feet. Immediately, with the violent roar of the explosion, the earth trembled, the space trembled, and the mountains and hills on both sides of the road also trembled. Then, all kinds of limbs and heads of their companions, some familiar and some unfamiliar, flew in the air along with the dust and withered grass. They tossed and turned in the rolling airwaves and did not fall for a long time. Using the purple chamber cannons to ambush was Lan Shah's idea. But as for where to set up the purple chamber cannons, it was decided by the members of the Gray Space personally. It was very sneaky and insidious. Almost all the locations, as long as there was a team of soldiers guarding the pass, it would be a situation where one man could hold the pass and 10,000 men could not pass through. Even if there were thousands of soldiers below, they would not be able to easily take over and destroy the purple chamber cannons easily. The main force of the brand had thousands of soldiers, but they lacked time. They were afraid that they would be chased by the tribal army, so they could only brace themselves and step into the deadly place where the cannons were fired continuously. In this area, regardless of strength, identity, military rank, and so on, there was only one thing that counted if one wanted to pass through this area, and that was luck. If one was lucky, even if one was a low-level soldier or even a wounded soldier, he or she could still crawl through this area safely with a lame leg. If one was unlucky, even if one was a commander, a hero on a battlefield, or a future famous general, he or she would be equally torn apart and become one with the light and dust. The purple chamber cannons. This weapon was designed by the god of war of the brand and improved by Lena on the battlefield. It was the most effective weapon in the current environment, and it had become the biggest nightmare of the brand soldiers today. It was just like a human meat grinder. There was no need to wait for the right time, no need to aim calmly. There was no need for anything. As long as one picked up the explosive crystal and placed it on the smoking barrel and gently released it, a large number of frightened souls would slowly rise from below. In front of it, there was no need to talk about killing one person every 10 steps. Below, when the brand soldiers took a step forward, 10 people would die. These were all descriptions that were trying to downplay. No one knew how many people were killed or injured in this battle. They only knew that the roar of the cannons lasted for a long time, and countless explosive crystals were thrown out. There were also many cannon barrels that were so hot that they exploded. They only knew that during this period, the soldiers who controlled the purple chamber cannons changed batches after batches. It was not because of the casualties, but because they needed to find a place to vomit. They only knew that after the battle, the gray coat army soldiers who could not clean up the battlefield simply collapsed the mountains on both sides, completely covering the mountain path. Only then did they cover up the mountain corpses and the sea of blood. They only knew that most of the brand soldiers who were lucky enough to escape alive could not bear the sound of thunder in the future. Once they heard it, they would go crazy. Chapter 1053. When Lan Shah took over the Gray Coat Army, he had a verbal agreement with Josiah. It was to lead the Gray Coat Army to conquer the entire north of Bran in about half a year. At that time, the Gray Coat Army was in an awkward situation and was in a dilemma. Therefore, even though Josiah knew about Lan Shah's amazing military talent and valiant achievements, he did not seriously consider this agreement. Even when the Gray Coat Army did indeed sweep through thousands of miles under the command of Lan Shah, Josiah never mentioned this topic again. He was afraid that it would embarrass Lan Shah. The current achievements were already amazing. If they could not do it, it would be meaningless to mention it again. Just like those members of parliament sitting in the Bran Congress chamber. Every year at the beginning of the new year, they would always habitually talk big and make countless promises to gain attention and the funds of their respective departments. In the end, these promises would of course not all be fulfilled. However, as long as one of the things was done, or even if it was just a preliminary progress, it would be enough to complete the task and would not be troubled by the Bran King's court. That was probably what it meant. However, now that the main force of the Bran army at the front line had retreated, this seemingly illusory agreement suddenly became real. Perhaps it was because even a fool's 1,000 thoughts could be enlightened. Or perhaps it was because they were frightened by the bloody method of the Gray Coat Army using the purple bore cannons to stop the enemy. The Bran King's court made a rare, correct decision to retreat, and it was carried out quite thoroughly. They did not entangle with the tribal army and the Gray Coat Army at all. With an extremely rare and high efficiency, they quickly withdrew their forces, crossed the river by boat, and returned to the south. This also meant that the resistance of the Gray Coat Army's advance was getting smaller and weaker. In less than a week, the Gray Coat Army, who were in a frenzy of killing, suddenly realized that there were no longer any organized figures of the enemy in their field of vision. They even pushed to the bottom of the city. Before they could set up their chariots and horses and move out their purple bore cannons, they were shocked to find that a white flag was hung high on the wall, and then the heavy city gate was automatically opened. It was as if they were welcoming guests with open doors. This made the gray coat army soldiers, who had been engaged in constant battles and skirmishes for the past few months, very uncomfortable. They had a strange and absurd feeling of, I've already taken off my pants, and you're showing me this. All right, forget about this strange feeling. The current situation also made the soldiers and citizens of the Gray Coat Army realize a fact for the first time. Bran was defeated. Bran was defeated. Just a month ago, Philip was still haggling with Tang in about his firm attitude of not giving up the North. Now, there was no need for negotiations. The entire northern part of Bran belonged to the Gray Coat Army. It had only been 3 months since the appointment between Lon Shah and Josiah. It had to be said that having someone as handsome as Lon Shah was truly terrifying. In such a short period of time, such a drastic change also caused the Gray Coat Army, from Josiah to the ordinary soldiers, to suffer from a serious illness called worrying about personal gains and losses. They wanted to cheer and celebrate, but they felt that the scene in front of them was seriously unreal. It was as if the moment they woke up, a beautiful dream would disappear into thin air. They couldn't be happy. Of course, this feeling of anxiety would eventually disappear. What replaced it was an overflowing confidence in ecstasy. The news is here. Bran has indeed escaped this time. According to the intelligence from the secret agency, there have been countless official ships coming and going on the Leno River these past few days. They are mainly transporting soldiers and officers back to the south, as well as some important military supplies, wealthy merchants, nobles, and so on. It seems that they want to empty the north in the shortest time possible. Scorched earth, they're still being transported. Looking at the scale, it will take at least 3 days for them to be transported. Chief, Deputy Marshal Lon Shah, do you think we should send an army to attack? After a pause, Fry, who was personally reading the intelligence report, looked at Josiah and Lon Shah and shook their heads slightly. He nodded and continued to smile. Well, there's indeed no need for that. They won't be able to transport anything in a few days. It's not worth it for us to take action. Fry, who had the aura of a nouveau riche, waved his hand generously. He was filled with a willful aura that was called buy a bun, then throw a bun. This was the general mentality of the Gray Coat Army soldiers who had just slightly recovered from the shock and began to accept that they had defeated the colossus that was the Bran Empire. Poor people couldn't resist the ecstasy of this kind of windfall from the sky. After flipping to the last page of the intelligence report, Fry couldn't help but smile again. Oh, there's another piece of news here. The Bran Palace has sent a negotiation team again. They just crossed the river and came to the north the day before yesterday. This negotiation team is quite sincere. After a pause, Fry looked up at the surprised eyes of Tang, En, and the others. He licked his lips and said, this time, the person leading the negotiation team is the second prince of the Empire. In addition to a group of congressmen, there are no less than 5 red-cloaked archbishops from the Temple of Light. TSK. Why is the Temple of Light here? Could it be that they are here to confer a title to the leader? Ha! Fry shook his head and thought for a while. He couldn't help but laugh sarcastically. But then he looked at the strange expressions on Josiah and Lon Shah's faces. He was suddenly stunned and realized something. His smile froze and turned into shock. No way. Could it really be, what? Conferring a title? There were only 4 people in the room at the moment. Tang En, Josiah, Lon Shah, and Fry. Judging from the relationship between these people, they were Tang En's closest higher-ups in the Gray Coat Army. They were a fixed small group with Tang En as the link. Don't underestimate the power of these people. Most of the orders in the Gray Coat Army were first decided by this small group. Then, the higher-ups discussed and promoted it. Tang En's importance in this was undeniable. It was no exaggeration to say that without him, there wouldn't be a gathering of these people. But other than that, during most of the discussion, Tang En only played a decorative role. It couldn't be helped. Whether it was military strategy or internal affairs, these were not areas that he was good at or not as good as the people in the room. Therefore, there was nothing much to say. For example, right now, Tangin, who was not a native of this world, was still asking Fry, Josiah, and Lan Shah. One was a former noble of Bran, and the other was the current royal highness of the northern wilderness. No matter who it was, they were all familiar with the etiquette of royalty. Even Fry, who had never seen it, had some common sense in his mind after hearing about it. Bran was an empire where royal authority and theocracy were closely combined. Apart from war, it seemed that the situation of several archbishops in red robes would only appear when they conferred titles to important figures of the level of lords who were in charge of a region. Of course, the coronation of the king was another matter. Generally, the Pope would personally confer the crown. In other words, they should be here for the conferment. After a pause, Lan Shah's lips curled up slightly as he looked at Josiah with a mocking smile. He was not mocking Josiah, but mocking Bran's approach. It can be considered as using the Temple of Light to save some face for yourself. It means that you were not defeated, but you took the initiative to give in. Ha! Hypocritical Bran. Your brain is always full of these hypocritical tricks. It seems that I didn't beat you hard enough. Shaking his head and laughing, Tangin didn't understand the etiquette of royalty, but he wasn't stupid. He immediately understood the intention of Bran's move. We can give you the north, but pay attention. It's for you, not for you to take it away from us. In short, they wanted to set up a monument for their chastity. That's strange. I was also a Bran before. Why can't I understand what they are thinking now? Shaking his head, Fry, who also understood, grinned and mocked. What are they thinking? They still have the mind to think about this at this time? Actually, it's a good move. Lan Shah narrowed his eyes and pondered for a while. Then he suddenly smiled and turned to look at Josiah. If I'm not wrong, the main purpose of the other party should be to pacify the Grey Coat army to withdraw from attacking the Bran Empire. They may even give you some benefits like war reparations. Well, I suggest you accept this negotiation and accept the conferment. Why? Before Josiah could say anything, Fry couldn't hold it in any longer. He was a little agitated. Is it necessary to negotiate? The North is now ours. Why do we need their hypocrisy? The key is not to negotiate. Shaking his head, Lan Shah calmly explained, in fact, there are some things I wanted to say when most of the Bran forces retreated to the south, but I haven't found the right opportunity. Well, the nature of the Grey Coat army is a bit special. In a sense, they're using the strategy of elite troops. This also means that the scale of their forces is not large enough. To put it simply, the current military strength of the Grey Coat army alone can't destroy the Bran Empire. At least, there is no hope for them in 2 or 3 years. This is the truth, and I think you know it. Josiah and Fry were silent when they heard this. This was not a tacit agreement. It could be seen from their expressions that they were more or less unconvinced. In fact, to a certain extent, no matter how much they poured cold water on themselves and reflected on themselves, including Josiah, Fry, and the thousands of soldiers of the Grey Coat army who were celebrating outside, they were now in a state of mind. They felt that the Empire was just so. They felt like they could invade the Bran capital tomorrow and drag out the old king. To be honest, they couldn't be blamed for this. The poor suddenly became rich, and their emotions were not stable. Not to mention, they had now overthrown a huge empire. It was natural for them to feel a sense of accomplishment. However, Lan Shah acted as if he didn't see the slight conflict between the two and continued. Moreover, the Grey Coat army is a new force that has just achieved success. Everything, including the superstructure, the lower structure, and so on, is still in a budding state. This will take a long time to build, settle, and slowly digest. It is impossible to be in a continuous war for a long time. Even if you are willing, the soldiers will be tired, and the people who follow you won't be able to accept it. Pause for a while. He waved his hand. Don't be in a hurry to refute. Let me finish. I believe in your prestige, and I also believe that as long as you go outside and make a call now, the Grey Coat army will immediately start to cross the river and fight without any objections. However, it is meaningless, isn't it? Do you still remember the purpose of the Gray Coat Army when it was formed from nothing? Can you still remember the purpose of the people who were willing to send their children to the army and fight to the death? Can you still remember the original intention and not forget the end? Those people, soldiers, they followed you to pick up weapons and rebel. They wanted a stable life with relatively little oppression and exploitation. They didn't want to keep killing people or dying. Do you still understand this point now? In the face of Lan Shah's continuous questioning, Tang raised his head and looked at Josiah and Fry, who were silent. He clenched his hands and lowered his head. This time, he was really silent. He sighed softly. From the beginning to the end, Tang In, who had been standing from the perspective of a bystander, was more clear-headed than anyone else. He knew that Lan Shah was right. That was the reason. Not many people were warmongers, and not many people wanted to fight all the time. The Gray Coat Army was made up of ordinary people. Compared to fighting, they definitely preferred a stable and peaceful life. The reason why they had previously been in favor of fighting was because they had been forced and suppressed too much. Only through fighting could they change all of this. But now it was different. They had already gotten the result they wanted. If they continued to fight a war that was destined to be unwinnable, it would not be aggressive, but greedy. From this point of view, the Brand King's court was also clear-headed. They knew that the Gray Coat Army could not destroy them, but they were also afraid that the Gray Coat Army would go against the wind and do something stupid. Therefore, when they were defeated, they still sent out the negotiation team with a strong sense of self-humiliation. They just wanted to persuade the Gray Coat Army to calm down and stop attacking the South. It was indeed a good move. Tell me your real purpose. Tang deliberately eased the atmosphere. He looked at Lan Shah with a smile and said, "Hee, I don't believe that you poured cold water on me for so long just for the good of the Gray Coat Army." Lan Shah glared at him in annoyance and said straightforwardly, "Accept the negotiation and try to get as many benefits as possible. Then, the Gray Coat Army will settle down. Yes, you can consider where to build the capital city and other issues and enjoy the happy results of the war. As for the following war, you don't have to get involved. Make way for our tribe's army to pass through and reach the Lino River. This is the 1,000-year grudge between the Brand and the Northern Wilderness tribes. It's time to settle the score." Chapter 1055. When are you leaving? A basin of cold water was poured down, the vanity was washed away, and the white stone was revealed. In this case, there was nothing to discuss. It was indeed time for the Gray Coat Army to leave. Josiah, who had completely sobered up, also agreed to the preliminary negotiations. Of course, this was only a preliminary agreement. The Gray Coat Army would definitely refuse a few times and put on airs. Only in this way could they completely suppress the momentum of the Brand's negotiation team. It would also be good for them to obtain more benefits for their side in the future. In addition to these small calculations, both sides also had to discuss the time and location of the negotiation. In short, the real busy time had just begun. However, only Josiah and Fry were busy. Among the four of them, Tang didn't care about anything and didn't want to be involved in these trivial matters. Lan Shah couldn't intervene because of his sensitive identity. So in the end, seeing Josiah and Fry having an intense discussion, Tang casually said goodbye to Lan Shah and walked out of the room. Looking up at the gray and gloomy sky, Tang let out a turbid breath. He turned his head and asked with a smile, "When are you leaving?" Lan Shah didn't look up at the sky. Instead, he looked at the Gray Coat Army soldiers and civilians in the distance who were running around and cheering as if it was a festival. He was a little dazed. Hearing this, he paused and rolled his eyes at Tang In. His gaze was disdainful. "Bran who kicked me to the curb after I've outlived my usefulness. Do you really want me to leave quickly?" Tang In shrugged indifferently and didn't argue. Of course, he didn't mean that. He also knew that Lan Shah wasn't so narrow-minded. He was just making fun of him. Of course, it was indeed difficult to answer this question. Since the last time he came back from the jaws of death and understood Lan Shah's feelings for him, Tang In seemed to be particularly low-key in this regard. For such a resentful question, He would either laugh foolishly or wisely keep his mouth shut. With Lan Shah's intelligence, of course, he had long understood the hidden meaning of Tang Yin's words. When he saw this, his expression darkened slightly. However, he quickly recovered and curled his lips. "Oomph, coward, you don't dare to do anything with Josiah around. When the tribal army arrives here along the main road, I will naturally leave with them." Huh? As if he had thought of something, Lan Shah pursed his lips and chuckled playfully. "Don't worry if I don't leave now. I'm worried that I won't be able to leave after a while." How could that be? Why not? Don't tell me you don't know anything about it. Ever since Blank's army retreated to the south, my military authority was gradually taken back. Although the Gray Coat Army hasn't been mobilized on a large scale, the direction they're pointing at is the main path our tribe's army will be passing through, isn't it? Pause for a while. Lan Shah glanced over. Not only are you trying to burn the bridge after crossing it, but you're also trying to bite the hand that feeds you. When Tang Yin heard this, he touched his nose and looked a little embarrassed. However, he didn't try to hide it and said frankly, "It's just a strategic precaution. You also know that the Gray Coat Army can't win against the tribal army, so it's impossible to bite the hand that feeds you. It's just a gesture that doesn't mean much." So it's like this. Lan Shah narrowed his eyes. Then from the standpoint of an army commander, after I return to the tribal army, do you think I should consider swallowing up the Gray Coat Army to lay a foundation for our tribe to destroy the brand and unify the mainland? Anyway, you can't beat us. Haha, what's with your expression? Do you want to kill me? It's just a joke. Look at how scared you are. Tang Yin smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. This wasn't just a joke. In fact, if Lan Shah really had such an idea, she would definitely succeed and gain a lot of benefits. Don't worry. As long as your little lover keeps her promise and gives the northern area of Fire Beacon City to the tribe, this won't happen. And it's considered a threat. You have to think carefully. Stepping forward and approaching Tang Yin, Lan Shah's face under the lens was charming and dangerous, like a bunch of thorny roses. Tang Yin didn't get angry. On the contrary, he looked at Lan Shah and nodded seriously. He said solemnly, "Thank you. The so-called threat was, of course, just a joke." The northern area of Fire Beacon City was the bet agreed upon by Lan Shah and Josiah. She deserved it, and the promise not to attack the Gray Coat Army was a promise made by Lan Shah as a private person and also as the commander of the tribal army. This was a real favor. No need to thank me. It's a cooperation. We're not hypocritical brand people. We're very honest and loyal. As if nothing had happened, Lan Shah casually raised her hand and patted Tang Yin's shoulder like a bandit. Then, tilting her head and thinking, she frowned slightly. "All right, be careful during the negotiation. Don't ask me why. I'm just guessing without any evidence. I just feel that whether it was before, they should have just given up on the north and retreated strategically. Or now, even though they're obviously humiliated, they still came to negotiate. It's not like the usual style of the Brand King's court. The difference between before and after is a bit too big. Of course, it's just a guess. Maybe the Brand King's court has finally been hurt this time and knows how powerful they are. Hee hee, with your brain, there aren't many people in this world who can trick you. In short, be careful." Slightly stunned, Tang Yin raised his eyebrows and nodded. "Don't worry, if the Brand King's court really wants to play tricks, I'll play with them." Wow, so domineering. Lan Shah's voice sounded a little childish. She cupped her fists and placed them under her chin. She instantly acted like an exaggerated, love-struck fool. Is this the demeanor of the continent's #1 expert? Tang Yin's mouth twitched slightly. He also knew that the strange woman in front of him was still a young person in private. She would often do some unreliable things. Of course, it was limited to acquaintances. Don't slander me. I'm not the strongest person in the continent. Huh, I'm not slandering you. Grandpa Bamitu told me that after the battle on the river, the sword god Wu Ding was crippled. He doesn't have many days left to live. Although he's not that miserable, he's also lost a lot of his strength. I don't think he'll be able to come back in this life. Other than the two of them, Even if there are masters in the world who are stronger than you, they can't do anything to you. So, even if you're not the strongest person in the continent. Okay, stop. Tangan waved his hand to stop Lan Sha and counted with his fingers. With a fierce look, he hammered his palms. I didn't expect you to see through me after I've kept a low profile for so long. Tell me, who are those who are stronger than me? I'm going to kill them now. How dare they fight with me for the strongest person in the continent? They're all tired of living. It was a small twist. Of course, it was just a joke. The title of the strongest person in the continent was not so easy to carry. To put it in a more terrifying way, don't be fooled by the glittering gold above. There must be a pile of bones below. Of course, Tengen didn't care about it. Even if there was a day when his strength, realm, past achievements, etc. were worthy of the title of the strongest person in the continent, he wouldn't stand out to claim it. What kind of joke was this? He was an assassin. Was he looking for death by being so famous? Or was he looking for death? In the next few days, other than the celebration, the Gray Coat Army's priority was the negotiation. Well, it didn't go well. In the beginning, it was because of the Gray Coat Army that they deliberately rejected the other party's negotiation requests time and time again. The reasons were very strange. For example, today they wanted to celebrate defeating Bran. Tomorrow they wanted to celebrate the anniversary of the Gray Coat Army's establishment, and the day after tomorrow they wanted to celebrate the weekend off, etc. However, Bran really put down his pride this time. No matter how ridiculous the Gray Coat Army's reasons were, he persisted in his requests. One side deliberately made things difficult for them just to vent their anger. The other side didn't fight back when they were hit or scolded. In this way, this small setback was naturally quickly brushed aside. Then, the preliminary time and location of the negotiation were set. They were all set by the Gray Coat Army. Bran's side was very easy to talk to and accepted all of it. However, just as the two sides were about to officially enter the negotiation conditions, things didn't go well again. This time, it was the Gray Coat Army's problem. Or more accurately, it was Josiah's problem. She firmly rejected the ceremony at the negotiation site where the few redcoat archbishops conferred her title. The reason was very simple, and that was that the Gray Coat Army didn't believe in this. As for the real reason, of course, it was because of the late Rosa. Josiah's attitude was firm, and there was no room for negotiation. Bran's side also persisted, which was unusual. Thus, the two sides fell into a temporary stalemate. It was just that Bran's messengers who traveled thousands of miles to deliver the news were often rejected the moment they arrived at the Gray Coat Army's encampment. They had to return dejectedly to report on their mission. In this way, after about a week, Bran's side finally accepted Josiah's insistence. Just like that, the preliminary negotiation continued. However, Tang suddenly sensed a dangerous aura from it. Just like Lan Sha, it was just his intuition. He felt that something was wrong. Chapter 1056. There was a town in the north called Red Maple. As the name implied, this small town that was situated between the Gray Coat Army's encampment and the Lano River was surrounded by large expanses of maple trees. Especially during the autumn season, the maple leaves were dyed bright red like the sunset, and it was rather magnificent and dreamy. Hence the name, Red Maple Town. The town itself was very ordinary and inconspicuous. Such small towns were as numerous as the hairs on an ox in the north. Their numbers were only slightly fewer than the farms of a lower level. But in the near future, this town, which was slightly deserted because of the war, was destined to go down in history. That was because this was where the Gray Coat Army and the Bran Empire would officially negotiate. Now, on a stone wall that was about 20 feet tall to the north of the town, facing the cold wind at the end of winter, Tang leaned against the wall and carefully observed the overall layout of the town. Then, he narrowed his long and narrow eyes and looked around at the surrounding hills and streams. After a while, he asked softly, "Do you think there's a problem with the negotiation location I chose?" Naturally, there was an answer, but David, Luke, and the others looked at each other in bewilderment when they heard that. They were both confused and shocked. The Gray Coat Army had the final say on the time and location of the negotiation. In other words, Tang In had the final say. This wasn't strange. This concerned the safety of Josiah and the upper echelons of the Gray Coat Army. Only Tang In was qualified to take over this job. Everyone, including David and the other members of the Gray Space, believed that with Tang In's ability, no matter what tricks the brand played, he would be able to easily see through them and ensure everyone's safety. But now, David stared blankly at Tang In, who was frowning slightly, and asked hesitantly, "Boss, is there a problem? I don't know. It just doesn't feel good." At Twain's level of strength, he had an almost instinctive premonition of danger and evil thoughts. But this was the problem. He was the one who had set the time and location for the negotiation. Now that he'd checked the site, he didn't find any problems. Logically speaking, with Brand's current predicament, he really couldn't afford to play any tricks. After all, if they failed, regardless of whether the Gray Coat Army was willing to join forces with the tribal army, they would definitely insist on fighting back and attack the south of the Brand. Everything indicated that Brand should not have any tricks up his sleeves in this negotiation. However, Tang In's intuition told him that something was wrong. When he thought about Lan Shah's reminder and the seemingly pointless stalemate with the Brand over the past week, Tang In felt even worse amidst the silence. Some noise drifted over with the wind behind him. The group turned their heads and saw a large group of carriages and horses entering the town from the south. As soon as they entered, the elite cavalrymen dressed in standard armor quickly spread out and controlled all the entrances and exits of the town. Following that, a long line of vehicles from the middle road arrived at the town's central square. After a short while, the people who came finished negotiating with the town's officials and began to unload large amounts of wood, cloth, statues, bonsai, and other decorations from the vehicles. Tang In and the others were not surprised by the sudden arrival of this group of uninvited guests and their large-scale construction. In the current north, without the permission of the Gray Coat Army, these Brand cavalrymen, who obviously came from the south, would not be able to swagger into the town. Right now, these were the advanced troops of the Brand's negotiation team who had already greeted the Gray Coat Army. The reason why they came here was to ensure the safety of the Second Prince and the members of Parliament who would arrive in the next few days. Just as the Gray Coat Army did not trust the Brand Empire, the Brand's negotiation team, who were now in the Tiger's Den, obviously did not trust the Gray Coat Army either. As for the second reason, it was to conveniently build a grand venue that was worthy of the important negotiations that were to follow. By the way, in the eyes of the Brand's negotiation team, the small town that Tang In chose as the venue for the negotiations was obviously a country bumpkin style. It was the same as the Gray Coat Army's temperament. They were all low-class goods, of course. The Gray Coat Army was also extremely disdainful of the Brand's approach. The losers should have the awareness of the losers. They made it seem like they won the battle. Seeing this, David curled his lips disapprovingly. A bunch of idiots who care so much about their reputation. Haha, it's right to care about their reputation, but they aren't idiots. David, believe it or not, after this negotiation is over, the newspapers in the south of Bulin will definitely write something like this. The Empire will host a grand ceremony, conferring titles and rewards to the Gray Coat Army, blah blah. That makes sense. If that's the case, the people in the South will definitely not think that we defeated the Empire, but that the Empire pitted us and so mercifully rewarded us. Clowns. Some things could not be said to be right or wrong. Even if it was false propaganda, in the eyes of the Brand Empire, as long as it was beneficial to maintain the dignity of the imperial court, then it would definitely be done. The Gray Coat Army members who started from scratch and were more practical obviously disdained such an approach. That's enough. Tang In waved his hand to stop everyone's disdain and ridicule. He turned to look at Harry. Have you confirmed the size of the cavalry and the identity of the workers? Have you sent people to monitor them one by one? Don't worry, boss. All the members of the Gray Space have been sent in. Harry nodded confidently. It's such a small place. No matter where they go, they won't be out of our sight. As long as you're willing, I'll report the color of their leader's underwear to you tomorrow. Don't talk nonsense. Tang Yin pointed at the various materials and decorations that were constantly being unloaded from the vehicles in the distance and said solemnly, "These few days, bring a few people to be supervisors. Be careful. I don't care what method you use, but you must ensure that there are no problems with each material. Yes, you can take samples to check in case there are explosive crystals hidden in the wooden blocks. If you encounter any obstacles, just kill them as a demonstration." Okay. Harry nodded without hesitation. He nodded, and the few of them ran down the city wall toward the center of the town. Paused for a while, Tang and said again, "David, do you see the mountains and hills dozens of kilometers away? Take someone to search the carpet. If you don't find anything, leave someone to continue monitoring. Luke, take someone to the river on the east side of the town. Also, search the carpet to make sure nothing goes wrong." "Yes, sir." After receiving the order, the people around him instantly disappeared and went their separate ways, leaving behind only the cold little Carol with her scythe. Tang was going all out this time. Since he couldn't confirm the source of his intuition, he could only take care of all the places that might be dangerous and minimize the risk. This was a stupid method, but it was also the best method. Let's go and take a look at the Brand's men with our own eyes. Tang In pondered for a moment, then took little Carol's hand and went down the city wall. "Brother, are you worried that there's an expert hidden inside? Are you kidding? Your brother is now the #1 expert on the continent. How can there be an expert in my eyes? We can't continue investigating like this. I'm going to find a small leader and have a good talk with him." "So it's torture. Brother, promise me that I'll force a confession out of him later." "David, get the F***CK back here. How did you teach me? Negotiations were about methods and techniques. When both sides were similar in strength and had a certain level of foundation, the process of bargaining couldn't be carried out. For example, in this negotiation, there was no need for Josiah and the second prince to meet to discuss the details of the war reparations. When they officially met, it would just be a formality and an agreement would be signed. There was no need to waste time talking in front of each other. It would be finalized very quickly. Judging from the current situation where both sides had entered the small town to negotiate, Josiah and the other high-ranking members of the Grey Coat Army and the Brand negotiation team, led by the second prince of the Empire, were undoubtedly going smoothly. They had officially entered the stage of actual contact. In the near future, this major negotiation that could, in a sense, change the structure of the continent would be held as scheduled. However, was everything really going to go so smoothly? At this time, in the eastern coastline area, in front of a church that was simple to the point of being crude, but fortunately, it was not small. "Sir Knight, Sir Owens has returned from eliminating the mountain bandits?" Sir, the corner of your mouth is injured." There were sparse greetings. There were many people coming and going in front of the church, but they were all in a hurry and were very busy. When they looked up and saw acquaintances, they would greet them. If their minds weren't on this matter, then it was fine to ignore them. It was only when the gatekeeper saw Abel coming over that the corner of his mouth was bruised and swollen that he exclaimed out loud, that it slightly attracted the attention of the surrounding people. "It's nothing, cough, cough. It's an unlucky year. The location of the mountain stronghold is too remote. I've been looking for it for a few days, and I was accidentally hit by a tree branch when I was making a move." Hiss. Owens, who was wearing a mottled armor, covered his mouth with one hand and replied vaguely, "Oh, it seems that Sir Thomas hasn't left yet. Sir, you can go there for a simple treatment." "Well, thank you." Nodding and thanking the gatekeeper for his concern, Owens stepped into the church, but then his foot stopped in midair. He turned his head and looked at the ordinary carriage on the open space beside the church. He was stunned. Sylvia's carriage isn't here. She went out? Oh, she went to the south to chat with Sister Cindy again? Thinking that he guessed the answer, Owens shook his head helplessly. This woman can't stay idle for even a moment. Why doesn't she look at her current physical condition? How could she run around? She shouldn't go to the south. The gatekeeper hesitated and said, "Sir left the day before yesterday, and took a lot of people with him. He seemed to have received some news and left in a hurry. Well, he left with a gun. With a gun? Flame gun? Owen's face changed instantly. He was angry and anxious. Nonsense. Things had already turned out this way. Did that crazy woman still want to fight with others? Damn it. His news. Where did the news come from? He was so excited that the wound on the corner of his mouth was affected. He suddenly grimaced. I'm not sure. It seems to be from the original temple. What? The so-called original temple was naturally the former employer of this group of clergymen who had established the new stream. It was the headquarters of the Temple of Light, located in the south of Bran. Although they had betrayed the Temple of Light, the two sides were now like fire and water. But after all, they were of the same origin. Owens and the other members of the new stream were naturally inextricably linked to the Temple of Light. This meant that Owens and the others were not two-faced people who wanted to please the Temple of Light. It meant that their personal friendship with some of the people in the Temple of Light would not be easily broken. This meant that the new stream had placed countless spies in the Temple of Light. Previously, they had escaped the encirclement of the Temple of Light many times and brought the team here safely. This was also one of the reasons why they could escape the encirclement of the Temple of Light. Hearing that the news came from the inside of the Temple of Light, Owens had a bad premonition in his heart. He had no time to argue with the gatekeeper. He quickly ran into the church and broke into Sylvia's room. Soon, he found the letter in the drawer under the table. He glanced through it and gasped instantly. He slapped his forehead and said, "Oh, this silly woman." He rushed out of the door and shouted, "Guards, quickly, prepare the horse, prepare the horse." "Owens? Oh, what's the matter? Didn't you just come back? Why are you going out again?" A white-haired old man in a magic robe walked out of the room. Seeing the impatient Owens, he was stunned and asked in surprise, "Thomas, oh, Sylvia is in danger. Men, where the hell did everyone go? Hurry up and prepare a horse." "Danger? What danger? Is the Temple of Light going to attack us again?" "No, it's her man. That silly woman went to save him. Think about her current physical condition. How can she save people? If things go wrong, we might even get caught up in it. Isn't that dangerous? Alas, I can't explain it clearly in a short time. I'll take my leave first." Owen's figure disappeared from the courtyard after giving an incoherent explanation. "Man, save people?" The white-haired old magician was obviously confused. He murmured subconsciously, "What does that have to do with us? Isn't it over if we can get Sylvia back? She can't walk fast. But then again, who is her man?" This was the problem. The white-haired old magician thought that Owens was worried about Sylvia's physical condition. Otherwise, it would be very easy for her to get into danger. Little did he know that Owens was not only worried about this. He was also worried that if something happened to Sylvia, someone would go crazy after knowing the inside story. At that time, he wouldn't recognize anyone and would leave corpses everywhere. At the same time, while Owens was rushing out with dozens of white knights, in the capital of Bran, a middle-aged man wearing a robe embroidered with royal patterns was sending a kind-looking old man out of the door. "When the matter in the north is settled, I will immediately cooperate with you in the castle. In short, I'll leave everything to you." The old man nodded reservedly and slightly smiled. "Don't worry, Your Royal Highness." "Oh, no. In a few days I should be calling Your Majesty. The temple will always be on your side. There won't be any accidents in the north. Those rioters will eventually be annihilated by the punishment of Father God." "Well, but I'm afraid that the second prince will also." "It's okay." The middle-aged man, who was the first prince, waved his hand without any expression. "My brother has never dealt with me. Since he wants to get close to those rioters, then I'll fulfill his wish and send them down together." The old man smiled and nodded, indicating that he understood. Then he asked, "The Pope is still worried about Wu Ding. I don't know how Your Royal Highness is going to deal with him. The sword god can't be touched." The first prince blurted out. Then he realized that the old man in front of him represented a rigid relationship with Wu Ding. After a moment of silence, he added, at least not for the time being. Wu Ding's safety has a great impact on the brand's morale. If something happens to him at this time, whether it's for me or the temple, it will be extremely disadvantageous. I understand. I will convey your Royal Highness attitude to your Royal Highness. I believe your Royal Highness will make a wise decision. Thank you very much. Nodding again, the old man smiled and turned to leave. Phew! When the old man's figure disappeared, the first prince suddenly let out a long breath and looked up to the north. That was where his younger brother, the second prince, was now. Pause for a while. He turned to look at the center of the castle. That was where his father, the old king, lived. His face gradually became cold, and he snorted. One is old and muddle-headed, the other is childish and naive. You have completely forgotten the 1,000 years of glory that belong to the royal family and the Bran Empire. You only want to drag out an ignoble existence, and do not think about making progress. So, let me replace you and lead the Empire to the peak of glory again. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.